what areas of responsibility they had, so we'll move down the table from the left here to the right and share that with the audience.
Okay. Michael Lilienthal, Deputy Chief with the Dorado Fire Department, and I represent the Public Safety Group.
I'm John Davey. I'm the chair of the El Dorado Hills APAC, and we have residents examine and review proposed developments in the area and provide resident feedback.
I'm Richard Ross, Dick Ross, and I am representing the idea of good governance, which is fundamental, ensuring that the public knows what their government is doing to them and for them.
And I'm John Heidel, District 1 Supervisor.
Cindy Munt, Supervisor Heidel's Assistant, and Community Information Outreach for the community.
All right, very good.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And I'm the District 1 Planning Commissioner and the Infrastructure guy.
I looked for you a few minutes ago and I didn't see you, so.
Okay.
Fair enough. The other thing I'd like to do is identify any of our volunteers who serve on other committees or commissions. I know Alan Stansberry is here. You want to just tell them basically what your role is, and then I know Raylene Nunn is here, and maybe some other people if I can pick them out of the audience. But
I'm Alan Stansberry. I'm the chairman of the El Dorado County Human Rights Commission. And earlier today we had our December meeting, and we have been focusing our energies on developing a report for an annual report for the Board of Supervisors, which we'll probably give in April.
okay, very good. Then Raylene, can you just tell us what your role is?
I'm Raylene Nunn. I'm John Heidel's Appointee to the Commission on Aging.
Very good. And you want to identify yourself? Yes! I didn't know if you were okay with it or not. So
No.
All right.
I'm on the cemetery committee, the cemetery advisory committee.
And just give them your name.
Melinda Peets.
Melinda Peet. Oh, and Wendy May has arrived. So Wendy, you want to tell us what your role is?
I'm the happy person of our tax assessors and appeals board. I hope you'll be happy about the taxes you pay.
I turned mine in today. And for those of you who don't know, there is a drop box in the county treasurer's office. So it's really pretty simple. If you don't want to pay the postage or you're up that direction, you just drop it in and done.
Yes.
So, okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to item 2, and that's the adoption of the regular agenda. Does anybody have any special requests this evening? I know that Josh Elder had asked that Kirsten Rogers on the Excel program. Is Kirsten here?
I'm here.
Okay, very good. Hi, pleasure to meet you. Be given some priority in some of the reports here, so it's not too late, because I think Dr. Elder was going to be here if he could. And then I know that Mike Lilienthal has to leave 8:30, so we got a little bit of time before we get that. And then is there somebody here from our Sheriff's Department or our CHP? Yeah, CHP's back here. Okay, very good. So we'll have that report as well. But with those exceptions in terms of prioritization, does anybody have any other suggested changes? All right, seeing none, we'll just go with that. Item 3, public comment. So this is the portion we allow anyone to present something to the leadership team who would like to discuss it, as long as it's not on tonight's agenda. So, Wayne.
John, this is not on tonight's agenda. We're going to talk about the El Dorado Hills specifically. Just a little background. Parker acquired the old El Dorado Hills golf course with full knowledge it was zoned for open space. He wanted to showcase his interest into Serrano through the golf course instead of coming off of Wilson Boulevard at EDH Boulevard as originally planned. They thought they could get by without an overpass or a tunnel at Serrano Boulevard, which bisected the golf course. I and others knew it was unsafe and pointed it out to his staff, and proved it when the golf cart was hit by a car the day after Serrano opened. It cost them $3 million to put in a tunnel, which is about the same they paid Mansour for the golf course. When Parker turned over the Serrano Country Club to the members, he had no intention to continue operating the old El Dorado Hills golf course. He claimed he was losing money, but did nothing to promote its use. He bought off over 500 members of the El Dorado Men's Golf Club with $30,000+ to move them to Empire Ranch. Instead of running the old El Dorado Hills golf course, they dreamed up the Central El Dorado Hills specific plan, adding more acres of land that is expensive to develop due to slope and asbestos deposits, and add the petroglyph site, which has no relationship to the original project except for being in El Dorado Hills, and now claim half the project will be open space. With this rezone, we trade 100 acres of usable zoned open space recreation land for land that Parker knows is expensive to develop due to the terrain and soil conditions, asbestos. We are given empty promises with a proposed development agreement that shows little benefit to EDH. It is one big maybe. There are too many contingencies in this agreement which allow the developer to avoid specific performance. For example, there are no guarantees that a frontage road from Silver Valley to EDH Boulevard can connect to Saratoga through Rayleigh's La Brigada Shopping Center since it's owned by someone else. In fact, Parker declined to put in a simple sidewalk which would allow safe pedestrian traffic on Bass Lake Road to a new Safeway shopping center because he didn't own the right between their project and Safeway. It's my information and belief that 2 supervisors are against this project and will vote no. John, you ran to promote, and I quote, preserve open space. I and a majority of other EDH voters believed you, and you got elected with our help. We have both read the Central Elder Hills Specific Plan staff report, whose conclusions are all slanted towards the developer. The same set of facts can be used to show the opposite effect, that the project is a detriment to El Dorado Hills. The studies cited are not up to date and assume facts that are contingent upon variables the developer does not control and requires other governmental agencies' prior approval. There is sufficient evidence to allow the Board of Supervisors to make findings of fact that the project is not consistent with the general plan and thus deny this rezone. SOS, EDH, save open space in El Dorado Hills. It's a simple question, John. Are you a yes or no vote for the El Dorado Hills Simple Plan?
I will respond to that in due time, but the primary answer is the review that's going on through the Planning Commission has just begun. There's a lot to be discussed, and no matter what happens in that process, I want to make sure that the community gets the best benefit we can, should there be 3 votes.
John?
That's the position I'm taking.
To me, that's a no or a yes.
Can
What is it?
I comment on this as a decision maker as well as planning commission, because it's currently in our shop. And it's presumptuous for people, no disrespect to anybody, you know,
No, either.
if I can finish, Wayne, that's okay, you have plenty of time, it's my time now, that's all right, and then you can respond. For me as a decision maker and for Supervisor Heidel, a decision maker, it would be inappropriate for us to comment on our position when we haven't heard all of the facts and all of the issues. You got to go through the process, and in due course, those decisions and positions will be taken. So, you know, you got to go through the process. I want to hear more facts. If you see or you know, or download or listen to the video, or not, this was excuse me, an audio for Planning Commission. You know, we raised a lot of issues. I want to hear what they have to come back with. I want to hear more from the public and so forth. So we're in the middle of that process at the Planning Commission. But, and certainly from a legal standpoint, for someone, a decision maker, to take a position that I'm a yes or a no, and the other supervisors haven't taken a position on it that I'm aware of, I think it'd be highly inappropriate for them to do that, and could potentially be setting up the county for a lawsuit to take that, you know, such a position before it's come before them. That makes sense?
It makes sense,
Okay.
but we've had 7 years to look at this. We got the same old all over again. Yeah, we go through the process, and I understand the process, and that's why you don't see me at too many meetings, because I don't want to be bored to death by going to your meetings.
Well, I try to liven it up as best I can, but okay. But we gotta go through the process. And again,
You guys
to
have
ask
got the
someone
information you want.
To ask someone to state a position of yes or no is really an inappropriate question. my
No,
view.
I believe it's an appropriate question.
Okay, so I think we're having too much back and
Yeah,
forth.
and I don't want to take control of your meeting because I just came in for public comment. John, I love you. You've been a good friend for 35 years. I respect your position. You've done a lot for this community, but you've been brainwashed by Parker and his BS, and that is BS. We're going to try to keep this
I don't
clean.
believe I've been brainwashed by anyone, and the
Well,
process will
Yeah,
reveal all the
well,
information.
when you told me you were educated, I think you've been brainwashed.
Okay, I
Thank
don't think
you.
that's the case, but you have your opinion, I have mine. That's
You
fair.
got it.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. Any other public comment? Sure, Jim.
Wayne's a tough act to follow. I'm Jim Pridemore. I have two questions. And the questions come from doing some reviews of the project documents. And also, well, the first one was at the November 13th APAC meeting. Kirk Bone had a slideshow showing the RHNA housing element of approximately 5,000 units from 2022 to 2030 a year as justification for the project. And he's pushing that a lot. However, the RHNA capacity does not appear to be an issue for this project because in the meeting on 11/19/2019, the boss meeting, there was something that said the staff believes the county has sufficient land use capability to meet the anticipated RHNA allocation for the 2021 to 2029 planning period. So what is it? Is it, do we believe Kirk Bone or do we believe the county plan?
I think you have to believe the county.
Okay.
As best I know our staff position, and Ann Novotny is here, and some of the people that do that part of the planning operation work in her organization, the numbers that were put into the inventory that was done, I think in 2013, indicate we do have enough properties available in that inventory throughout El Dorado County. So we do not need to necessarily rezone or find anything else other than that. I believe that's the truth. But we need to look at, is there areas that should be rezoned because the areas were previously identified will never be built to meet RENA requirements. Because the state is now getting much more involved with trying to force counties and cities to actually build the numbers of housing units they've been assigned and not just plan for them or have an inventory. If they never get built, you're in trouble. So I got the RENA numbers. I was going to cover those a little bit later this evening, Jim, so I'd be happy to share those with you, including what it means in terms of a purchase value for a piece of property and also what the rents are for a family of four in both cases.
Yeah, I just am looking at it at a high level saying, you know, I have a problem of the developer pushing these scenarios or these narratives that I believe are false. And I just want to point them out.
I don't think the county needs those numbers to satisfy the RENA. I think it is additive to what the county is really trying to accomplish if those homes are built. Because again, the part is deliverables. There's a lot of that inventory that I don't foresee being built to meet the needs of the RENA requirements within the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
So that's the argument we have is what can you actually do? And when it comes down to meeting the number of above moderate income residences, which is 1,952 throughout El Dorado County, you need to recognize that 85% of the growth that's happened in El Dorado County in the last 5 years has happened in El Dorado Hills. So this is where the growth is. This is where the homes will be built to keep the state from coming after and attacking the county and trying to basically leverage off of their position. So whatever happens, happens. But I believe the staff's numbers are accurate, that we have sufficient inventory to justify the RENA
Okay.
model.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yep.
You know,
that's fair.
I'm actually very skeptical of anything that Kirk Bone says. I dealt with him in the HOA, and there's my reason. Okay, the second one is also coming out of the documentation for this project, and it's regarding the physical analysis of the project. And it says in the physical analysis that the county is expected to lose $4,885,000. It didn't say that specifically, but it had a chart when I calculated it out. Over 15 years until build out, and $494,000 annually thereafter. This project is a loser, according to that. Considering this project is a loser financially from the beginning, would you approve the project? I mean, if that was your only criteria,
No, I
without,
would not approve the project. That's the reason Dixon Ranch didn't get approved. The
Right.
numbers for the county, the community benefit didn't pencil out. It was gonna have to be a subsidy by the taxpayers. The same provision applies to this project.
right,
We've had Joe Harn involved with the development agreement team until he bowed out to make sure that those numbers met the requirements. I don't know where Joe is on that particular issue right now, but if he comes forward and says the numbers don't pencil, the county will end up subsidizing this project, and the facts are available that support that, then I can't support the project at all.
right. Because in the project documentation, it says, yeah, we'll have that loss, but we mitigate it through taxes, or Melrose. To me, that's just robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the developer is the one that's standing up on the hill watching all this stuff go on, and
Yeah.
it's not gonna cost him a penny. So that to me is a big concern about losing money. And my feeling is, and I'm trying to push this scenario, is that land could be used for so much better benefit to the county, or to the El Dorado Hills and the county, from a cultural and from a recreational perspective. And if you look at the details of what that property can do, it can benefit the whole county. And I did a vision with a scenario of bringing in extra revenue, and my scenario came in, it could earn over $2 million a year. And so you put that up against a losing proposition where all you're doing is building houses and paying taxes. Turn that on the other side where you've got people with great recreational environment for their kids. I mean, our kids are going to have a place to play and grow. And if we build houses there, we're not going to have that. Anyway, sorry.
I just want to point out Alan Priest, who's on the board of directors for the Community Services District, is here. We've had several discussions about what does the community need in terms of parkland, the size of it, et cetera. I think Alan, if not the full board, has gone on record saying they are interested in purchasing the 98-acre golf course at a reasonable price.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to determine, in my opinion, is what is a reasonable price that we can take a buyer and a seller and come to an agreement that the community benefits. And maybe it's not the full 98 acres. I don't know how this is going to end. But to me, it's a discussion that has to happen. The CSD was involved with the development agreement discussions all the way through a major part of the process. And then there was a departure. And I don't understand why, because I don't participate in any of those. But the bottom line is we've tried to involve the CSD. I think there is a potential for a good deal for everybody.
Yeah.
And what I have told Parker from day one is this has got to come out as a win-win for the community. The CSD has to come out a winner. The community has to come out a winner. But you're not going to get my support. That's what I told them. They understand that. I'm still waiting to see how this evolves through the process.
And I addressed that issue at the Planning Commission. Alan knows this. I've talked to Alan about this. And I publicly made statements to Kurt Bone as well as Kevin, in respect to, finding a win-win type situation concerning this property. And so far, it hasn't happened. So
It's got to be a win-win.
I talked to them both privately. I addressed it publicly because we were getting nowhere. And so we'll see how it develops.
Well, we'll do all we can. By the way, I have a website out there. It says Parks Not Parker.
Yep.
You can see what side of the fence I'm on. And I've got a petition. We've signed over 1,300 petitions. John gets a bunch of them.
So have you seen our response?
Yeah.
Okay, because we are trying to respond to the public.
Right.
We're providing a link to the APAC meeting video link, and then the link to the Planning Commission audio. so that people get to hear and understand and see the facts. I thought the presentation, even though I wasn't able to be here at the APAC meeting, was a pretty detailed review. I mean, there's a lot of lower level details, but the top level elements of the project were presented, and everybody had a chance to comment, the public was here to comment. That starts the dialogue, in my opinion, and there's been a huge void. Now we need to conclude the dialogue and come to a decision.
Yeah, it's hard for the, I have another on next door, I just wanted to tell you about it, that I put a poll out there that said the same thing that Measure E said back in 2015.
Yeah.
And the response now is remarkably similar. I've got like 1,600 people that said they would like the golf course to stay as is. So it's a mirror image of what happened in 2015.
Yeah.
If that means anything to anybody, it's
No, it
not.
does.
It wasn't a vote, but it shows the sentiment of the people.
Yeah.
And believe me, everybody I talk to, everybody says they want that thing to not be rezoned. So I'm talking here to maybe 2,500 people. I'm their voice right now.
Yeah.
So, just wanted to
Your voice
pass.
is being heard. That's all I can tell you at this point. I want to see what the process leads us to, and then a decision will be made. So, yeah, Alan.
Thank you.
We need to kind of conclude this and move on, but quickly.
Were you referring to me in the
No,
negotiation?
Alan is in the back of the room over here.
Oh, all right.
Alan Priest is on the CSD board. Different Alan.
Thank you.
Unless you want it.
I was kind of looking over his shoulder. So Wayne, I'll give you another 2 minutes if we got to finish this off. So.
No, bottom line, John, the county rezones that property, the CSD's screwed because the property price goes up. If it stays open space, it's worth $8 million in my opinion.
Okay.
I can
I'm calculating my own numbers.
Yeah.
It's good to know what yours is. $8 million.
Yeah.
Alan doesn't think so.
It's still public.
Yes. You gonna go speak? That's fine.
Okay, public comment time, and because I'm not from that chair right now. Richard Ross, a citizen here. Twice a year, this thing gets me. Today I was asked to make out a rather large check to a person who works for the county. I see no reason why I should write a check to a person who works for the county. I don't do that. I write a check to the treasurer and tax collector. I refuse to do that. I believe it's a violation for an elected official to use the county's stationery to advance their name in some way that would influence the electorate. And having the return address on the letter that I am sending back to that was sent to me with my tax bill, I think that's a very flagrant violation. I know it occurred in the past, and it was probably the only reason that treasurer was ever reelected and reelected and I didn't do enough reelected here, but a lot. So that really bothers me. Also, I know that the what was the commission that Charter Review Commission?
Yes.
Looked at some of the elected positions. That position was one of those that was suggested as being eliminated as an elected position because it is primarily an administrative role that's carried out by a staff. And there are very few things that can be identified as policy issues that particular position fills. I think enough has been said about the development, although I think it is important for those of us who live in this area to not just think of that old golf course as an El Dorado Hills golf course. There's a lot of people on the western slope who are closer to that public course than any other course that they could play on. And we need to think of this as a county asset that is being, if you will, eliminated, and the county will no longer have a readily accessible public golf course in this county for anybody to play. And I think it's something we need to think about in terms of encouraging a place where our younger people can go and play, older people can go and play, and more creative ways to utilize that space just and beyond golf. So I think it is a county asset. And third, there's a question of what is our community? What is our community? Over here on the north, that's north, we have District 4. Down here on the south, we have District 2. And each of those districts have to continually gobble up some of our, quote, El Dorado Hills citizen. So this course is a benefit to not just El Dorado Hill, District 1, but to District 2 and District 4, because these are folks in our community, and I think our community goes beyond El Dorado Hills. Okay, I've taken enough time. Thank you.
With respect to your first one, I did talk to Karen Coleman, the current treasurer tax collector. She said that things were printed up for this first round because the first payment was due, and then the second payment was due. So I also met with legal counsel to try to convince them that it was illegal, as you spoke to. And there was provisions back there that the Board of Supervisors actually had said that you cannot send it out under that at some point in time by one of the other supervisors, like 8 years ago, and then all it disappeared. So it's a known issue. It's been reported and it's been run through county council. That's the best I can tell you. I will meet with Karen again and try to convince her that she ought to change that. Because I think it's inappropriate as well. I totally agree with you. So, yeah.
I second writing a check to an individual. That's weird, because I've done the same thing. Thought this seems a little fishy. Anyway, Matt Cobabe, I'm working on the business park. I've got a couple of buildings we're working on out there. I wrote a letter to your office. But I got two issues. One is we have an issue where your county design standards state that you can't have any roll-up doors facing any frontage road. And that's an issue for a lot of places, especially ones where the buildings take up a whole block, because you can't put a roll-up door on the building at all. So there's some issue with your design standards. In order to put a door facing a road, even if we put, a screen across it, they still want us to submit it and get it full county approval on everything first, which is kind of bizarre, because I guess that process is it would take us a year and cost us thousands and tens of thousands of dollars.
So that's a variance process? Is that the way they explained it?
Yes, exactly. It's a variance process, yeah. And what's weird about that is what Business Park, there's about 20 doors all facing the roads already, including 4 loading docks. Robert J. Matthews, there's one with probably 8 docks all facing the road. Now they have a screen and everything, but it's just kind of strange when we went to submit a project that was an issue. Now we redesigned the project, and it worked out better for us on this project in particular. But you have a lot of 20 some odd projects out there that all violate that design standard, so it ought to be reviewed. Second one I'm having is I have an issue with the storm drain out there, and I've been fighting with the.
That one I'm aware of. I wasn't aware of the first one.
Yeah. Now like I said, we did a redesign on that. It cost us some money to do the redesign, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world, But our design professional, he says, hey, every county's got this in their design standards. They probably just adopted it from another county. He says those counties are pretty. They look at it and go, this doesn't make sense. Well, for whatever reason, when we went to go review it with the plan reviewers, they said, hey, yeah, it's a standard. We have to, enforce the standards. Nothing we can do about it. Now, and the second issue was our storm drain out there. You guys kind of know about that, and we have a problem with the building department, in our point of view, creating and enforcing underground regulations and adopting them and claiming that they are not. And and when we go to talk to them about that, it was like probably one of the rudest conversations I've ever had with anybody. And so we'd like you guys to really look at what your building department's doing and look at them. We get people out there all the time on projects, especially from the building department, that really just don't know what they're doing. And so there's that education issue there. And that's just, across the board, every county has the same problem. The more the inspectors that you have out there that are reviewing, a million different trades, they really don't have expertise in a million different trades. It's just not possible for everybody to know everything. And so we get this issue where they'll give us things back that are absolutely totally wrong, totally don't exist. We'll ask them for the code or the regulation. They can't give it to us. When they do give it to us, they'll say, oh, it's enforceable because we have this regulation. And then we'll say, okay, well, where's the specific code section? Where's the specific item requirement? And there isn't any. And so we have this issue where they make this policy, this regulation, and enforce it when there is none.
appreciate your inputs. I'm exploring a number of different things related to our planning and building department right now, so.
Yeah, and I know there's other, people that have had the same issues and other, even, agencies within your own, county that's had the same problem. So that's pretty much all I have.
Okay, and can you send my office the information on the roll-up doors, because I've not heard that
Yeah.
one before.
Yeah, absolutely.
So please forward it. Have you seen it?
The storm drain's got the roll doors.
Okay, so we need to see the roll-up doors, and then I can take both things and discuss it. I didn't discuss the storm drain thing once with them, but
Yeah, and the storm drain, we expect it to go to the city attorney for her to look at it and say, or them or whoever, and say, oh yeah, this is a, either we have jurisdiction or we don't. Instead, we just got a letter back, and it just basically says, hey, we have authority. Okay, great, Well, I guess we could say you don't, and we could say, you do, but that just goes back and forth. That's pointless, so.
right. But it needs to be a fair determination.
Exactly, and the next step is we were going to submit it to the Department of Underground Regulation for the state of California, but we just thought maybe we could, resolve it within the county first and not take those steps. So,
Thank you,
appreciate
Jack.
it.
Appreciate it. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah.
My name's Deborah Simon, and I live in Bridlewood Canyon. And just a couple comments. Just with the golf course, my two boys learned how to golf there, and I understand it was about 2008 when it was closed, or just before that. That was the height of the recession that we had, and the population was much less, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have some type of a little golf course, or even if it's just a driving range and a putting chip area, since there's so much asbestos around there as well. Just digging around there would be, really a problem, I think. But anyway, we just loved it, and hopefully it can come back, or some version of it, because the economy is booming and there's tons of people that I think could appreciate it. Second thing I want to mention is Bass Lake Road again. I saw the article about Joe Harm putting a little bit of a halt on that area, which is great.
Just filed an appeal, so yes.
Right. Someone took out the 40-mile-an-hour sign over the weekend. Car lost control just before the causeway. I don't know who replaces that sign, or who has to be notified. Do you have any idea?
DOT.
They didn't know
Daryl
about
Brown,
Yeah.
the maintenance department.
Right, okay. And from just towards Highway 50 now, in front of Hawk View, they've repaved it, and it appears to me that Wynn Communities is a better citizen than Parker. They're putting turnout lanes, they're doing probably what they need to do. They haven't striped it yet and painted it, it's wet, I don't know how long it's going to take, but right now it's really dangerous. And then as you get further towards Highway 50, they've put the concrete barriers, and coming around that curve, you can't see the striping, you can't see anything. I mean, it's really a disaster now that we're in the winter. And then you're going to go from something that's fixed to something that's not fixed in all the little hills. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me that the county, the developers can't get together and do something reasonable all at once. Because we're going to just have cars sliding all over. And again, I'm not even going to mention the potential for kids getting schmucked, or people who want to walk or ride a bike once that Safeway opens. So I just want to reiterate that again. One last point. When we're voting on whatever we're voting on in this county, Supervisor Veer-Camp obviously has a conflict of interest. Every bit of machinery has his name on it. We know where he stands with development. I think we should delay any kind of votes until he times out, which will be next November, and just wait and see what happens after that.
I think it's actually the end of December, because his term,
That was the
essentially
term?
newly
Okay.
appointed, newly
Right.
elected,
Yeah.
sworn in January.
Right. Well,
So,
regardless,
yes.
if there's any votes on
I
development,
will
he should
say,
abstain.
from his perspective, he recuses himself anytime there is an authorization for funding of Veer Camp
Okay,
construction.
right.
So that's the one thing he every time he recuses himself, leaves the room, etc. So
But that doesn't stop him from voting on development issues.
not today.
Right. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, that was a lively round. One more? Okay. Let's keep it going. Let's try to get it done though. Please identify yourself.
I'm going to talk about something different. It's probably a smaller concern, but the beautiful new trail that we have for hiking and biking along Silva Valley,
Yes.
Harvard to
Yep.
Appian, it looks like a grown-over ghost town. The lanes have become much more narrow. So if a person, a dog, and a bike are coming to each other at any point of time, somebody's going to collide, because it's like it's not tumbleweed, but there's other invasive weeds that have come in. And they did a great job in the beginning of getting rid of a lot of the goat head weeds. That's what I call them. I don't know what everyone else calls them. But anyway, and they seeded in natural weeds and grasses. And if they can get more, you can't just mow or chop the weeds that are there. I don't know if this is possible, but the only way to really get rid of them is to pull them. Okay? I know that that's a lot to ask for. It's asking for the moon, but that's really the only way to get rid of them. And then put down some more of that natural seed, and then you would see all of that take hold, all the natural migratory birds and stationary birds that we have in the area come use it. I have counted countless species there, which is really fun to do. But and the goat heads are just a problem for everybody. And I also tried to get the county and the CSD to speak about doggy depots. I'm like, okay, how big a deal could it be to put down a doggy depot? So that's not really the problem along that trail, so that you can pick it up and have a place to stash it. The problem is the maintenance.
I think the CSD was cooperating in that. They were going to donate some.
Yeah, so the problem is the maintenance. Who's going to empty?
I don't know the details.
Okay, that's what Kevin had told me. But
Yeah. So he's sure, that's cool, but the county needs to maintain them. In other words, put new rolls of bags in and take away the used ones. That's the sticking point.
Right, so there has to be some maintenance part of it, which we are trying to work with the CSD again to establish a maintenance agreement, I'll call it, for the bike trails within El Dorado Hills, because at least we have a community services district that I think makes more sense to do that maintenance on a regular basis, but there's got to be some compensation, consideration, whatever from the county, and that's the part we never got to in the discussion. But the discussion has started.
So the county knows that it needs to happen, but they're not getting their wheels turning.
Well, the DOT stuff has been reported several times, and there is improvements going to happen now next year for relative to the drainage, because a lot of what happens is the silt accumulation, the weeds encroach on it because that pavement has not been kept clean because of various things that have happened during the wet season. So there's a correction that's supposed to happen. It got delayed, but ultimately when that's done, I think you're going to find less of what you're talking about. But clearly trail maintenance is one of the things that needs to be properly done. And again, we're trying to work with the CSD to make sure that happens.
Yeah.
So
good, thanks.
What was your name again?
Cheryl Goldsworthy.
Thank
So
you.
I don't mean that, just to clarify, I don't mean that weeds are growing out of the asphalt in the middle of the trail. They're growing from the sides, and they're this big around. And yeah.
Well, unfortunately, this time of year, they don't want to necessarily disturb the soil now that we got the rains.
Yeah, but to that point, they were there a long time before the rain started.
I'm talking about here and now, that, they're just going to make a bad problem worse by doing that at this point. Maybe they can trim it back because, that's your shoulder area, your recovery area and stuff.
Well, yeah, but it's also covering over the asphalt, so both,
Right.
So it's also asked about the striping, so you know,
Yeah.
because the striping on the new bike trail out here was completed. On that project, it wasn't. I can't explain why it wasn't included in the requirements for the contractor to do it, but we're going to try to get that corrected as well.
Thank you.
So,
For clarification, because nobody at my house knows what to do on that trail in Silver Valley. So, is it the type of trail that you're supposed to walk on the right? The left against traffic?
there should be signs out there that identify
there's
that.
nothing.
Well, I understand.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the more modern ways of doing it, they mark the trail where the pedestrians should walk, and there's a center line striping.
Right.
So that you clearly have an understanding of what's your side of the lane to be on, whether you're a bicyclist or pedestrian. For whatever reason, we don't have those standards in El Dorado County yet, but we're trying to get them established.
As a general standard, the bikes will be on the right-hand side And like you said, walking against the traffic, the pedestrians will be on the left-hand side so they can walk against
Yeah.
and see the bikes coming from the other direction.
Right, but I think it also depends on what grade level the trail is.
It's a class 1 bike path as well.
Okay.
Right.
And so you have.
For class
bikes
one,
and-
we're only talking class one is where this route
Okay.
is.
And that's pedestrians and bikes.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's typically, but again, you can set up whatever standard you want, but it needs to be signed or stenciling, on the pavement.
Oh, that would be
itself.
great. Because I'm a cyclist and a walker, and when I hear somebody say, "Behind you," I'm like,
Right.
"Oh shit, which way do I go?"
Supposed to be on your
And
left,
then,
right or something,
and you
but yeah.
have that long, and then you're in an accident. So thanks.
Okay, thanks for your input. Okay, let's wrap this up and get moving right away. So our next item number 4 is our guest speakers. And I'm pleased to introduce Ann Novotny and Aaron Mann. Is Aaron here?
Aaron's under the weather.
Okay, so Aaron did not make it. And then our consultant, Marty Eckert, who's also going to talk, and they'll present information on the county-initiated commercial multifamily residential design standards for community regions, because I think one of the things that was established many years ago in the general plan is we should have community-based planning in addition to regional plans and everything else that's there. So we've initiated a pilot with Shingle Springs, and now we're moving to other communities, including Dorado Hills. So that's kind of the overview of what Ann's going to talk to, Ann and Martin. So please take it away.
Is this on? Okay. So I'm Ann Novotny, and I'm planning manager with the Planning Building Department, and I oversee the Long Range Planning Land Use Unit. And this is a project that we've initiated this year. It is something that the board directed us to pursue, and it's in support of one of our general plan objectives, which is General Plan 2412, which is that the county shall develop community design guidelines in concert with members of each community, which will detail specific qualities and features unique to the community as planning staff and funds are available, and that each of these plans shall contain design guidelines to be used in project site review of all discretionary project permits. And so that's where this is coming from. The funding is being partially funded through the general fund as well as transit occupancy tax. And then we just recently submitted a grant application for SB2 funding, which will actually offset the TOT funding for this project. So we're very happy about that. And so what we're going to be doing, what we're doing now, this is part of our outreach efforts. We're going out into each of the general plan is designated for community regions in the county. Dorado Hills is one of them, as well as Cameron Park, Shingle Springs, and then the communities of Diamond Springs and El Dorado are combined together. And so we've been going out to all the communities, different meetings, and trying to initiate, this is a community-based planning effort. And so we're seeking volunteers from all the communities to help in the development of these design guidelines or standards for each of the communities. And so I'm pleased to let you know that we actually have 15 volunteers from El Dorado Hills, including Mike Lilienthal, thank you, and also Richard Ross. And then as, I don't know if Brooke Washburn is here, but I do have a list of all the names. I don't know if you want me to list everybody else.
Why don't you just go ahead and read them off
sure.
so people know if it's a neighbor or
Yes,
somebody
okay.
they know they can relate to that.
So, and if I mispronounce his last name, I'm sorry about that. So, Marshall Alamelda, Cliff Collier, Linda Dozier, Dan Hayward, Doug Huss, Georgianne Knight, I mentioned Michael, Greg Mason, Richard Ross, Brooke Washburn, Maria Wong White, Joel Wiley, Gatha Williard, William Willman, and then a Jackie Yepes. So that's what we have so far that have.
So nobody who submitted an application was denied the ability to serve. That was kind of as a question of how you're going to be selected. Everybody who submitted for at least El Dorado Hills will be serving on this committee, or invited to serve if they choose. Obviously, not to fulfill it, that's fine. But we're taking everybody and trying to include them.
Yes, and then we're also going to be doing Marty actually will be doing interviews with stakeholders within the communities, and so those are parts of it. So right now we're in more of the, couple of things that are kicking off is the existing conditions work, and then the plan is is to have the actual, we're calling them community advisory teams or CATs, to have their first meeting in January. And so maybe I'd like to turn it over now to Marty, and he can tell you. And what's also pleased is that De Novo Planning Group is the group that Marty is from, and they are one of the firms that had submitted proposals, and they are local firms from El Dorado Hills, so very pleased about that as well. So now I'll turn it over to Marty, and he can tell you more about the project. Oh, and I also have some fact sheets on this, and I can either pass them out now, and then I can also, if people, we're not saying that, this 15 is all inclusive. I have a couple of about 10 applications, and anybody else would be interested in volunteering to serve on that committee after Marty tells you more about it.
Why don't you pass out the information now, and just put the applications on the back table, so
Okay.
anybody can go back to the back table and fill it out if they like. Thank you, Ann.
All right.
Thank you.
Do you object if I just take the microphone off the
No.
bill? All right.
In fact, from the standpoint of recording, you're probably better up here.
Okay,
If you
I'll
don't
just
mind
head up
doing
there.
that.
No problem, yeah.
Yeah, because that way it's set up so that the video captures you up here.
Well, good morning. Good evening, everyone. I guess Thanksgiving is still hanging around. Good evening. I'm really excited to be here tonight. As Ann mentioned, the company that I work for, De Novo Planning Group, is based here in El Dorado Hills, and we're really excited to have the opportunity to take on a project like this in the community that we call home. Ann really gave a good introduction to kind of the workings of the project, so I'll tell you a little bit more about the bones of it. They're design standards and guidelines specifically for commercial and multifamily development. And the idea is to develop comprehensive, community-focused standards and guidelines. So that includes everything about building and site design. Again, the idea is that it be comprehensive. It will also include the categorization of architectural themes that both exist within the community and potentially additional themes that the community would be interested in seeing developed here. Outreach, again, plays a really important role in this project, and talked about the community advisory team, the CAT. Again, the first meeting will be in January. That will then be followed up by a public workshop, likely in February. So that's an opportunity for anyone in the community who's interested in sharing input on the project to come out and do so. From there, we'll really move into developing the guidelines themselves. We'll be meeting with both the supervisors and planning commission to wrap up the first round of public outreach and receive their feedback before we really dive into developing the standards and guidelines. And then from that point, the project team, so county staff, and the consultants, De Novo and Page & Turnbull, they're an architecture firm that is partnering with us. We'll spend about the next year developing the guidelines in concert with the CAT. At that point, we'll go back out to the community, and really at the final CAT meeting, we're going to have an open house where folks again can see the draft standards and guidelines, comment before we take the document forward for adoption. That's really it in terms of an introduction. I do have a couple of questions I want to ask, but before I do so, does anyone in the audience or in the leadership team have questions for me at this point?
The shingle springs process that was done to determine design standard, is that complete now for the design standard phase, or is there still some ongoing activity?
We're just kicking that off.
Okay.
So they're just kind of, we're trying to meet with them, we're hoping to meet for the holidays, but I think.
Okay, I thought they were a little ahead of the game, but they're not for design standards. Okay.
So we're building them as the prototype community, and the product that's developed, which will be exclusively standards, again, is the prototype. So the work that we do in Shingle Springs will inform what happens in the El Dorado Hills and then the other remaining two communities, Cameron Park and then Diamond Springs and El Dorado.
Okay, very good. Any other questions?
So in terms of the design standards, so they're defined by the community, but is there still an opportunity for an applicant for a project to have those standards waived and go for the general county standard? If they take that project back through the planning process to the planning commission, the board of supervisors, they can still opt not to, or seek an exemption.
So that's really something that we would have to discuss, but just based upon the entitlements that are currently in place, I would expect that it would require a variance. So it's really the idea of working with the community to define what is important about the character of just development that exists here that you would all like to see perpetuated, and then positive character that you'd like to see brought into the community, so that you enact standards, and where necessary, guidelines, which are more flexible. But those standards really being a commitment to what the community wants to see, so that there is certainty for the applicant and hopefully more desirable outcomes for the community in terms of the quality of aesthetics.
The way that's always been discussed is the design standards would help a developer determine where is the desired aesthetics, et cetera, for buildings and the features in it. But it's not an absolute. If they want to file for a variance to those things, they'd be allowed to process a variance. But that's going to be a more timely, more expensive process than working within the standards. And that's why you create standards, is to streamline things. And projects that used to take maybe 2 years can take 6 months. If you meet the design standards, it's more of an automatic review, and through the planning commission or through the board, if it goes to appeal, automatic approvals because you've met it's a checklist. You've met the standards as opposed to everything being a free-for-all. So that's what we're trying to accomplish in my perspective.
And I would also add to that with the state's movement toward trying to remove impediments to certain kinds of development, especially multifamily, there's this push for what's referred to as objective design and development standards. So again, doing everything to help these communities be compliant with whatever state law may proceed.
Any other questions?
In terms of, I know that the board authorized the funding to begin this process, and you're talking about the grant, maybe a key part of it. But ongoing, is this a process that's going to require sort of a set funding mechanism all the time, forever? Or is this just to get it going, and once it's established, and in terms of funding, it's not a big cost?
When the board made this decision to go with this, we had presented several community planning options, and so this is more like a standalone. It was kind of like a starting point, but the board had indicated that with the success of this project, that there was the potential to have about $250,000 per year for about 4 years. So, but the intent with this $250,000 is to actually have the finished products, as Marty mentioned, to actually have, and I actually have a couple of samples here.
This was a commitment from the general plan. It was approved by the voters, and all we're really trying to do, in my opinion, is fulfill the commitment of the general plan.
Well, my question
has never been done.
I understand, and that was my question, is that this board right now authorized that funding, but if there's a need for funding to continue and support the effort, is a future board going to be there to support it?
It's a TBD, because it's an annual authorization. It's not a commitment more than 1 year, basically, at a time.
So just to give some examples, a few years ago, back in, I think it was 2008, these Missouri Flat Design Guidelines were created, but guidelines don't have any real teeth. They don't, they're like, you encourage, to do certain types of development. And so one of the things that this community has wanted is to make these into standards. And so that might be one of the efforts that Martin will be doing. But another effort that we did, and this is where it does get into more standards, is a few years ago, the county, with the help of a consultant, produced a mixed-use design manual. This does have a lot of standards in it. It has some guidelines as well. So if projects come forward that want to do mixed use and they follow the standards, the project, as you mentioned, could be processed more, what's called ministerially, which means it doesn't have to go through the whole design review process. It can be handled more expeditiously and without having to go to these different reviewing bodies. So, and then once this effort is done, we'll be looking at other community planning efforts to move forward. This was just one kind of small piece of community planning. It's not meant to be just, this is it. But thanks for the question.
Okay, your questions. Let's move on to that.
Yes, if I might.
Question first? Sure.
Thank you, sir. Wendy Mae Davis again. This definitely leads to affordable housing in our county, which we need. Every county in our state needs that. I don't see any breakdown as to what degree, if there's a number of units or whatnot, that would be considered affordable housing. If you don't mind, is it at a stage where you could even break that down, or to what consideration has been given to that?
So this project deals with the design of projects, and it doesn't actually address meeting RENA numbers. So it's, in the case of, I refer to objective design standards, that would put in place certain standards that pertain to design and development that would help a developer come in and develop a project in a manner that's palatable to the community and also that meets state requirements. But in terms of the actual numbers required to fulfill RENA, that's a separate consideration.
For affordable housing
correct,
specifically.
For affordable housing, yeah. Starting with the county's housing element.
So I was going to cover that under economic development since Clint wasn't going to be here. So I'm going to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Just be patient. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so really the important thing for me to understand, I know in at least a couple of the communities, there were previous community-based efforts to understand the desired design characteristics in that community and even begin to formulate guidelines and standards. Based on our initial research, I haven't seen evidence of that here in El Dorado Hills. Is that the case, or have there been previous processes?
There have been discussions that were more related to when the general plan amendment, the TRPA, ZOU proceedings were going. There was always a discussion about something after LUPU, and the LUPU is another acronym, but there was discussions of a group in El Dorado Hills that looked at what would we want to establish as design standards, and we looked at community plans that came from several different communities, just to understand the context of what was done by different communities outside the county primarily, because Myers is the only one that I know of that has a community plan at this point. And Myers is kind of a special place and a special situation. It's not something you can copy and paste very easily. But there was that look at what would we like to see in a general discussion with the idea we come back once the TGPA ZOU is approved, and now it's time after 2 years, 3 years or something to try to get to that. So beyond that, I'm not aware of it. Somebody else may be aware of something relative to design standards in the community, but I'm not.
Do you happen to know who might have led that effort?
I did.
You did? Okay.
So I've got the information and the materials, so I can provide those to you. I'll pull them out, the reports and stuff. But there were a number of people involved, but I'll get you the information in terms of the other community plans that we've looked at, because there was some email and stuff that talks about preferences. But there was a discussion, and Debbie Manning of the Chamber was involved with some of that, Steve Ferry, so there was a number of people who were involved in that discussion. But I'll provide that to you in more details. It's easy.
Okay, and then just, this is a really broad question, but I don't want to, I guess, not take advantage of the opportunity of being in front of you. Are there any topics that you'd like me to know about at the outset that are of particular importance to you?
Hi, Maudie. I'm Andy Schode. Any lessons learned coming out of the Paradise Fire that's going to be cranked into some of the revised standards as to spacing of homes, type of materials to be utilized? I know that the state fire marshal is going to be tasked with coming up with a plan for the total state of California. So I know there are some lessons learned if you do a little bit of research on it, what has been written to a date. And I know there's some kind of a legislature, I don't remember the number right offhand, where the state fire marshal is going to be tasked to come up with some revised standards. And I sure would think that this should be cranked into this program, especially on materials, spacing, and so on.
Great, thank
Okay,
you.
Marty.
Thank you.
So one thing, Marty, I need to back up. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Noel Maddock kind of co-chaired that committee because she looked at a number of things relative to trails and interconnectivity, but specific to the community planning pieces of it, I was probably in the lead, but Noel and several other people were involved. So just so you know.
Thank you. Well, that's it for now. Thank you for your time. And again, we encourage you, if you're interested, to apply for the CAT. If you have any questions, I'll leave some business cards in the back of the room. Please feel free to follow up with me. Thank you.
Very good. All right, thank you, Ann and Marty, for sharing that information, and I'm sure there'll be more to come as our committee gets going and starts processing things in January. We'll probably hear more information. So I want to move on to item 5 then, supervisor communications, and he's going to be pretty brief. Most of you probably know, but some of you may not know, that the county has designated a day of remembrance on an annual basis for Deputy Brian Ishmael. It's October 23rd, and on that day every year, the county flags will be brought to half-mast. We don't have control over the U.S. flag, but we can control the county flag. So it's going to look a little unusual, because you'll see the U.S. flag at the top of the mast, and you'll see the county flag at half-mast every October 23rd. But the board did do that as a continuing remembrance of the sacrifice that Deputy Ishmael made in his line of duty. So, second item, Saratoga Way, Iron Point Road opening. We had talked about it opening hopefully here before the end of the year. My understanding now, it's not the construction, pavement, of other things that's limiting it. It's really the signalization and the poles and other things. But our DOT director, Rafael Martinez, is committed to try to get the road open by mid-January. But to do that, he's going to have to use stop signs and barricades as a temporary provision until the materials are required to actually do the signalization. It has to be done at Wilson Boulevard and Saratoga. So it's a workaround. It's not going to be optimum, but he is trying to get that road opened up by the middle of January, as opposed to the other input we got from the developer was April or May. And that's just taking too long. So we're trying to do what we can to get the road open. In large measure because our community needs it, and the other part of it is the city of Folsom needs it, because there's a lot of issues that happen on Empire Ranch Boulevard relative to the Via Belargio connection and other things that have created a lot of hardship for some of the residents down in Folsom. So we're trying to get it resolved as quickly as possible. Next item, Green Valley Road widening is expected to open late spring. Depends on the weather. They're basically winterizing, and they're doing a lot less, obviously. The main effort over the winter months is the box culvert that has to go across the roadway. Most of you have seen the pavement that goes up towards approaching where Shadowfax is, the El Dorado County line. It looks like they stopped. There's a huge misunderstanding thinking that El Dorado County is responsible for doing that segment, road segment between the El Dorado County line and Sophia Parkway. They're not. The city of Folsom is. It's all one project. So thanks to the city of Folsom for stepping up and volunteering to do that project with federal funds and state funds and what it takes to get the whole thing done, because to piecemeal that little bit between El Dorado County and the city of Folsom coordination would not have been a good thing. So that's why you see the road go up to that point where that box culvert, I believe, has to be put in or close to it. And that's where they're going to winterize and hold it. Then if we have a season that's normal, they're talking about late April. If we have a season that's as wet as it's starting to look like right now, and it runs into April, May, June, then we may be in the May-June time frame before the road gets completed. So it's really weather-driven at this point. But again, that's a road opening that I think is going to have significant importance to El Dorado Hills and the traffic flow, and I think it's long needed, and unfortunately it's now getting completed. So it's just taking longer than we'd all hoped.
John?
Yes?
They're going to repave the side we're currently driving on?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I just checking.
And if you notice, the elevations are different, and I think that's why beware of flooding signs. Because in a heavy downpour, there is a possibility that some of that water in the existing pavement is going to run over against that dam, basically abutment, and start flooding inside the road before it runs down to get into the drainage that's downstream from there. So it's a non-optimal condition, which is why they flag it. But I don't expect a problem if huge downpours, repeatedly, where that rainwater just hits in sheets, then you can end up with that kind of problem. But normally it'll drain off fairly quickly. But yes, they're going to bring the other side of the road up, repave it, the same elevation.
This company's doing a really good job. They would have been done if the other company did go bankrupt.
Totally agree.
I can't believe they got as much done as they have.
Totally agree. And we
Amazing.
told that to the city of Folsom at our 2x2 meeting that everybody has observed how quickly the new company got on board and how much they accomplished in a relatively short period of time. So it gives you a lot of confidence that it will really get done when they have the opportunity with the weather conditions to get it done. They're not going to drag it out. So that's.
Is there going to be a center median, do you know?
Is there going to be what? Opening? Yes.
Center median. Any type of, so cars can't get on there?
I have not seen the designs, but my guess is there's no planned center median. But I don't know that for a fact. I can find out.
That could be dangerous at night.
It can be, but we have a lot of roadways like that everywhere. So
Yeah, in El Dorado Hills, they have a center median, which is kind of nice, even though it's just a gray rock with a curve.
but
It's
not
still
everywhere.
something to keep
Not
on the
everywhere. So
side
it
of the road.
depends what part of El Dorado Hills you're talking about. But I will ask. I don't know. I don't think they planned it unless John has seen the plans. Yeah. I'm sure if it isn't there now, it's going to be impossible to try to get it, but I will ask. So, any other questions on that one? The last item, the Costco update, I was informed by our CAO that Costco is in the process of purchasing the property that they want to build their new warehouse facility on from EDH 52, and that with that purchase, they expect to submit an application and start proceeding separate from the EDH 52 project. Before, there was always the idea of doing everything together because of the cost of the EIRs and other things. If they process both the EDH 52 property and the Costco property together, that things would go much quicker. But I think Costco is getting anxious to get something done, and they really want to move out. They've done a lot of contacts with our various departments, primarily the planning department, to determine building fees, et cetera, et cetera. So they've clearly expressed an interest, from what I'm hearing from the CAO, to get a project started and get moving. But the EDH 52 part seems to be what's now kind of delayed a little bit. And so that will probably proceed on its own accord whenever that purchase agreement's made and things move out. So nothing definitive that we have an application in the report, but there seems to be a strong indication they're moving that direction as quickly as they can. So with that, any other questions I can't answer? Okay, so then let's move on to the leadership team progress reports. And so I'm going to ask for Chief Lilly's report and our CHP report. Who wants to go first? CHP? All right, we'll take the CHP report, Chief Lilly's report, and then we're going to go to Kirsten Rogers. So, thank you.
Fire department's first on scene, so thank you. Bringing me this time.
No problem.
I'm Officer Brown with the California Highway Patrol. I'm the Public Information Officer here in the Pottsville area, which includes El Dorado Hills. Not a lot to talk about locally. Our fatal statistics is kind of our big metric right now. It's getting a lot of attention. We're still at 28 fatal involved collisions in the western slope of El Dorado County, with 30 deaths involved in those collisions up to date. So that I don't think has changed since the last meeting. We've just concluded our maximum enforcement period statewide. Maximum enforcement period is typically holiday weekends throughout the year that the Highway Patrol selects to collect immediate statistics and also to get as much uniform personnel enforcing on the road as possible during those times. This Thanksgiving maximum enforcement period started at November 27th at 6 p.m. and then it goes to December 1st at 11:59 p.m. So that's about 102 hours. During the first 6 hours, this is statewide statistics that I'm bringing up now. In the first 6 hours, there was 157 DUI arrests statewide. After the first 30 hours, it was 314 DUI arrests and 8 deaths statewide on the roadways in CHP jurisdiction. After the end of the maximum enforcement period, our total fatals were down 29% from last year. This again is statewide, with only 42 people dying on California state roads or CHP jurisdiction. I don't mean to say only 42 like that is a small number. That's a big number, 42 persons. Of those, 41% were not seatbelted in the vehicle that they were riding in. Every maximum enforcement period, it's approximate. That's the lower number that I've seen recently during maximum enforcement periods. The fatality involved persons, usually 50%. And then our investigating officers give an immediate estimation if they believe that person would have survived if they were wearing the seatbelt. And of that, 50% are believed to have been able to live if they had been wearing their seatbelt at the time of the collision. So that's 25% of fatalities that we could prevent every maximum enforcement period and across the state, 365 days a year, if we had more compliance with that law. So if you ever stopped for it, take the ticket, put your seatbelt on. It's for your safety.
I think some people have a false sense of security that the airbags are going to protect them because you're in these cushioned pillows and it's going to save your life without the seatbelt. Wrong, right? I mean,
right.
They help certainly, but they're not going to keep you from being ejected out of your
Your
car.
car has what minimum 6 airbags in it. So the acronym that's printed onto most airbags is SRS. Is supplemental. That's the first word. Supplemental to your seatbelt. Nothing functions in your car as a restraint system without your seatbelt primarily working. So they only work together. They don't work separately. Yes.
I just wondered what excuses you hear for why people haven't had their seatbelt on. I don't understand it.
I've heard it all. You can imagine. But usually it's I just left that store. I'm just going down the street. I just left home. To I don't believe in wearing a seatbelt. It's my choice. Many of us could understand the economic toll it takes on the county to respond to a fatal collision. If you weren't wearing your seatbelt, it does not only affect you. It affects me. It affects me and my partners. Emotionally and financially, it straps the state itself and the county responding and conducting investigations, having to deal with something that could have been just a dozen-page report turns into something that could take days and days and weeks to investigate and complete reports, and medical costs and things like that. So it's not a victimless thing that we do. Yes, it does hurt you when you're not wearing your seatbelt, but it affects a whole lot of other people when we have to come deal with you when you die. So to round out the grand total, we had 867 DUI arrests statewide during that maximum enforcement period. Again, this is only 102 hours in the state of California. That's down a little bit. 2018 had 931 DUI arrests. The weather impacted statewide. The Grapevine was closed for a long time due to snow. They don't do chain controls in the Grapevine. They just shut it down. So that did limit travel. So I don't know how to compare it to last year's weather. I did not look at it. So on from death and destruction. So December 2nd through the 6th is Older Driver Safety Awareness Week. And the CHP is participating in that and recognizing that. This county has a massive elderly drivers and it's growing daily. And the Highway Patrol is focused on it. We've been awarded a grant. And during this week, we want to direct people to our offices, our area offices, whether it be Rancho Cordova or the Placerville Area CHP office. We're conducting Age Well Drive Smart classes. It's around a 3 to 4 hour course that we can give you a certificate at the end. I don't know if your insurance company will give you a discount. I don't know. Every insurance company is different, but it just goes over, typically it's taught by a senior volunteer. It goes over issues that seniors are going to be having to deal with in the future if they're not dealing with already. Ways to cope and maintain your driving ability. This county, I agree that services and things that you need to drive in most cases. So maintaining your ability to drive in the long term is key. So we want you to be able to drive for us as long as you can. And near the end, many elderly Californians typically spend about 6 to 8 years of their life not driving near the end of their life. So it is something that's in all of our futures. It's eventually giving up those keys, and when that'll happen and how that'll happen, we can discuss in that course, and it's very personal as well. So again, holiday season's coming up. We're doing our Chips for Kids toy drive. You can bring in your new unwrapped toys to any CHP office and donate them there. If you donate them at the Placerville CHP office, all these toys will stay in the county. They're going to El Dorado County, needy families and kids especially. Any questions for me? Any current things going on?
I keep hearing, there's a lot of speeding going on. There's a lot of running of stop signs, et cetera, et cetera. There's even, now in Francisco Drive, they have some speed signs that are up to try to make people aware when they're driving in excess. And the wildlife is part of what the impact is. I mean, there's a lot of deer there every year that annually are impacted, and some of them don't die on the side of this road. They get up in somebody's backyard, and the county or somebody has to try to remove them. And so there's a lot of impacts from that. But is there any possibility that the CHP would come up with some funding for some additional speed control signs? For instance, Via Belargio, I've been told, is a really bad situation with a lot of cut-throughs from both sides, from Folsom side, from the El Dorado Hills side. The county has these speed trailers, but we can't leave them located at any one location. But has the CHP looked at funding for being able to locate these smaller solar-powered units and be able to put them there for 30 days or something as opposed to a week?
We do have we have a single radar trailer at our area office.
Okay.
El Dorado County Star Volunteers have one. It's got a CHP star on it, so it used to belong to the Highway Patrol. It's been since sold to them, and it's fully operational.
Okay.
So we and Rob Smith, Officer Rob Smith, has now gone down to headquarters. He's started a development liaison program in between the Star Volunteers and the CHP to be able to better focus our deployment of the trailers. We do not have the funding, nor do I foresee any funding of buying anything other than those. And we do deploy those. Keeping them out overnight does expose them to vandalism and or theft. The counting units, which is the brains of the radar, is a very expensive piece of equipment. And so we don't want to keep them out overnight, so they are typically deployed for about 6 to 8 to 10 hours, then retrieved and brought back to safety at night. So we have been getting a lot more deployment of those trailers recently. If your office has any specific locations, just send me an email.
Okay.
We will get that out.
We will do that. Thank you.
Another thing for storms, I know El Dorado Hills, it snows east of here. So just make sure that your friends and family know how to drive in the snow, know what's going on. There's a huge storm coming up this weekend as well, a lot of snow. It's snowing right now, so make sure that they're bringing flashlight, shovels, food, chains, everything that they need to stick it out for a few days in their car just in case. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate it. Chief.
All right, Shannon Baker from probation. Sure.
Actually, our chief probation officer was just, he's now the president of the California Chief Probation Officers. So that will actually be a positive thing for El Dorado County. We'll have kind of like the in on what's going on with prison realignment and probation. So we'll kind of be on the first end of what's coming down from the state. So El Dorado County will be kind of a step ahead in the knowledge with what our chief will be bringing in.
Very good. Yeah, I thought that was quite an honor to be asked to step up into that position. Unfortunately, he's going to have to spend some time outside of the county, but he's got good staff to back him up and stuff, so I'm confident that it's all going to get done. And it does give us a better reputation, I think, in terms of leadership the county has provided with respect to probation and some of the services we offer. Unique programs, so we'll get to spread that word a little bit. So thank you to you and your fellow staff members who have done a great job with that.
All right, and I won't keep it too long, but fire department perspective, the month of December is fun, so we do a lot of community activities. So I did pass around the Santa Run flyer that kind of shows our stops this year. The fire department Santa Run, if you haven't participated, has been going on, I think, since the 60s for the fire department. And it's really focused on collecting toys for the kids and collecting food for the people that need food in our county. So you'll see the Santa stops come on by. We've got banners out at each of the locations so you can kind of tell where we're going to be. A rough time of arrival, but we look forward to this event every year, and
Yeah, I noticed that we only had you for half an hour.
which stop are you at?
The Fuller Sunset Mobile Home Park.
Got it,
I mean,
got
we
it.
always,
And we
you're
love you guys
always
here.
there.
These are rough times. We gauge these by the crowd. If the crowd, our Santa will not leave if there's a kid that hasn't had a chance to say hi to him. So he doesn't care about our schedule. He's planning on seeing every single kid that's there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, first-hand information. So no, they're just a rough timeline, so people know about what we're trying to do. Again, our focus is toys and food and just spreading, a happy time for the community. We really do enjoy it. It's a fun event. So that's next week. If you're so inclined to join us, we look forward to it at any of the stops anywhere. We're also participating in the Big Brothers Big Sisters Pancake Breakfast. That's coming up this Saturday morning. Really great event. There's a chance for kids that are disadvantaged in the community to go shopping with police officers and firefighters. We serve them pancakes. It's just a nice event.
It's a Target, right? Target.
It's a Target, and
Yeah.
then we serve the pancakes over Blue Shield. Again, just a good feel good. It's a good thing to do. We really enjoy doing that. The senior center tree, we were able to decorate that again this year. And just so you know, those lights that are on that tree were donated through a grant from the county. Supervisor Heidel helped a lot in getting that accomplished. So we were able to get new lights that were just a little bit brighter. So it's a great tree. We like doing that. And then, of course, this weekend is the town center tree lighting on the 7th. So there'll be an activity there if you're so inclined to join us. Any questions, fire department wise?
I have a question about the food drive.
Yes.
Is there some sort of quantification about how much you collect versus how many people get it and use it and need it, and is it ever short? Or is there a correlation between what you collect and what's needed?
So we do track the quantity we bring in each year. Unfortunately, I didn't bring it with me. But we coordinate through the El Dorado County Food Bank. They come out each day after our drive. It goes straight to them, and through their processing of distributing that food to the community. So I don't know exactly how they earmark the food we get them, but we do track how much we produce and give to them as far as a quantity each year.
They would be the person to talk to.
Yeah, they would know exactly how that food gets distributed in the communities. Yeah.
I've actually worked at one of their centers when they were packaging up all the stuff. We went down and spent 3 hours, and they had 3 different shifts and stuff. A lot of volunteers. It was a great program. That everybody got a frozen turkey, everybody got stuffing mix, everybody got canned stuff for the meal, and then a lot of extras and stuff. And if they asked or needed something special, then they try to find that for them as well. So our food bank does a great job, in my opinion. But it's all based upon a few staff and a lot of volunteers. So
I never really thought about it in depth, but it seems like this guy got a turkey. I didn't, I need it. Do we keep track of things like that?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. We don't. We just get them the raw product, and then they distribute to the communities.
So the gentleman who runs that's name is Mark Sproul. If I remember right, we don't have his contact information, but we can get it to you, Jim, if you want. Thank you. Mike Sproul. That's what Mike Sproul. Okay, so with that, let's move on and cover the healthy communities. Kirsten, you want to come up and share with us about some information about the Excel program? Sounds like you're hitting the accelerator on the floorboard or something, right?
Thanks for inviting me. My name is Kirsten Rogers. I'm with an organization called Excel, which stands for Access El Dorado. I'm a longtime county resident, straight out of college in 1985. We lived here a long time, and then my husband and I moved to Texas with Waste Connections when they moved in 2011. You probably are friends with a lot of folks from that company. Yes, we are one of those couples that moved back to California recently. Our children have established homes and families here, and we really like it here. So I retired from public health in 2011 when I left, and was part of Excel, and am now back on a very part-time basis as a consultant. So I know the hour is late, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about everything that we do, and we'll focus on what Dr. Elder asked me to come talk about. So we are the longest-standing community-wide collaboration of public and private health entities in the county. And our board consists of the CEOs and directors from Marshall Hospital in Placerville, Barton Hospital in South Lake Tahoe, the Shingle Springs Health and Wellness, which is tribal health right there on Highway 50 in Shingle Springs, the El Dorado County Community Health Centers, which are now located in Cameron Park, and then the Health and Human Service Agency's Public Health Division. We have created a systematic set of changes in the community over the last 14 years, from building an FQHC, a federally qualified health center, to doing a children's health initiative and getting all the kids in the county on health insurance before the Affordable Care Act kicked in, connecting all our partners to telehealth. But most recently, in the last year, we have focused on an opioid coalition. So back 14 months ago, our coalition kicked off with a summit at the El Dorado County Fairgrounds. We had about 150 participants, physicians, mid-level practitioners, policymakers. Really started to set a course of action, talk about evidence-based practices and what we could do here in the community. And I'm happy to report that El Dorado County has done a lot. We have 3 medically assisted treatment clinics in our county, one at Barton Community Center, one at the El Dorado Community Health Center, and one at Marshall Cares. We also are part of a very successful ED Bridge program throughout California, which is a hospital emergency program where opioid use patients get treated rapidly with a new form of medication in a very compassionate, non-judgmental environment, and they are connected directly with a patient navigator who gets them into treatment or connected with community resources within 72 hours of their release from the hospital. We've just been awarded a 3-year grant from the California Department of Public Health to continue our efforts, so we're happy to do that. We are going to be looking at our local statistics. As you know, this is a national epidemic. This is an epidemic that crosses every area of our community. So we're going to look at our local numbers, see where we're doing good work, expand our treatment to where we still need some help, and then hopefully in year 3 really hope to see some of those changes affect some local policies. So with that, Dr. Elder, who's on your community council, has been invited to our December 10th Opioid Coalition meeting. It's in the Shingle Springs Tribal Health Program. 12 o'clock. It's a public coalition, so please come if you'd like to. He's going to be talking about some of the innovative things that he does with UC Davis, and he's looking at opportunities to collaborate with our local providers. So we're really happy to have him as a new partner. So, any questions? Thanks for having me.
So I will mention, relative to the opioid stuff, the county is part of a multi-county entity that is actually pursuing a lawsuit against the pharmaceutical companies, the pharmas, who created some of this problem, and so we get briefed in closed session about that on an ongoing basis, but we didn't ignore it. El Dorado County, our local hospitals, Marshall Hospital, have been significantly impacted by this opioid epidemic. It's happened locally, and so we're trying to get compensation from the big pharma who pushed all this stuff and let it happen to try to reimburse and make distribution of those funds, whatever they may be. But as you know, with the class action lawsuit, that's essentially what this is. The attorneys get most of the money, and whoever is part of the prosecution team, in terms of the parties that are participating, they get the lesser share. But hopefully we'll end up at the end of this with something to show for it and be able to give back to the community in terms of reimbursement for efforts expended. Even though it's not going to be full amount, you recover what you can. So it's kind of a two-fisted thing. Let's get the right program going, but let's also reach back and try to hold the pharmaceutical companies who created the problem, in my opinion, and a bunch of doctors as well, accountable as you can. So, any questions for Kirsten? Didn't see any. So thank you very much for the update on Excel. Yeah.
Thank you.
So with that, does anybody want to go next? I have the RENA numbers. I can do that pretty quick. So let me get the RENA numbers out there since they were requested, and then we'll go to the other stuff. And the information I'm going to present to you came from a briefing that our long-range planning department provided. And for those of you who don't know, RENA is Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Every 5 years, SACOG, who is the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, starts looking at what are the requirements for growth within the region that SACOG covers. And there's Sacramento County, El Dorado County, a number of cities are involved, the city of Sacramento, the city of Oak Grove, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a large regional type view in terms of housing. So what the RENA numbers came back with was that for El Dorado County, we had 3.8% of the requirement for distribution relative to the overall SACOG area. So we're a relatively small part of this regional aspect. But in terms of real numbers for El Dorado County, I'm going to give you 4 categories because that's the way they break it out. The first category is for very low income people, and that's less than 50% of the median family income. So within El Dorado County, we're supposed to provide for, design, build, deliver 1,398 very low income units. And the only way you can come close to that these days is by multi-family apartments. You can't find a house that's going to come to that, a new house at least, it's going to come to that kind of cost. And what that essentially means is you have to be able to achieve a rent that's $1,000 or less per month to be able to make somebody who's a family of 4 eligible for that very low housing. I don't know if any of you have looked around for rental properties, but I don't know of very many places you can rent for $1,000 a month unless it's really old and really deteriorated. But that's what the state numbers show, that we have to provide 1,398 new units in that category. That's the toughest thing to do in this county, in particular with land values where they are and everything else that goes on with the not my backyard provisions. It's very difficult to do. So the more achievable number is for the lower income. So there's very low and then low. So the low income is 50 to 80% of the median family income, and El Dorado County has to deliver 765 units in that category. And that amounts to a new home that has a purchase price of $250,000 or less. So step up and tell me how many of you can build a new home in El Dorado County for $250,000 and sell it on the market. I don't know very many that can, particularly when you look at fees in El Dorado County, you're into typically $80,000 before you do anything to the property.
That's the price of the land.
That's a big part of it, the real estate value, but there's also TIM fees for Highway 50 and other things that go into that total cost, but it's very expensive. So what that amounts to is that you have to have a home that is a rent value of $1,045 to $1,673 a month. So at least on the upper end, you might be able to find some rental spaces for almost $1,700 a month as new construction. But again, really pretty tough to achieve, I think, unless you're talking about an 800 square foot studio apartment. And then maybe you can do that. But that's how the numbers come out. The next category is called moderate income, and that's up from 80% to 125% of this mean family income. In that category, we have to deliver 879 units. And what that amounts to is that you can have an asking price of a home of like $381,000 or less, or you can have a rent between $1,673 and $2,505 a month. So now, at least in the rental category, you're getting to some place that you can achieve the moderate. But that's a very low number compared to the very low. It's 879 for the moderate. It's 1,398 for the very low. Okay, so then the next category above that is called above moderate, and that's any home that's greater than 120% of this mean family income. In that category, we have 1,952 allocated positions, and that ends up being 39.1%. So basically, any home that's over $381,000 qualifies in that category. That's most of what we build. So there's no doubt in my mind, if we continue with the construction that's currently planned, we don't have a recession, etc., that for all of El Dorado County within this 5-year planning window, we'll probably be able to meet the above moderate housing. But when we talked about Central El Dorado Hills, that's the category you're going to be in, is above moderate. I don't think you'll be able to touch anything in the moderate range, at least not from what I've seen. So there's various information. The things I think to also recognize is the timeline we're on. And in February of 2020, the county is expected to adopt the Regional Housing Needs Plan. So there's a lot of activity going on with various groups that are supporting the county in this, the county staff. But by May of 2020, we're expecting to have the needs arena assessment adoption, and May of 2021, then it's the actual housing element update deadline. So there's a number of things that have to happen in a relatively short time, and there's things that have to happen over a longer period of time. But what I was able to do, and I think what I'm going to do is ask Cindy to put this information out, was get a copy of the affordable housing provisions for various incomes, and that's dependent upon household size, to share with people with a lot of numbers. And then the other thing is the rental housing cost in El Dorado County in the affordability category. So again, we can provide that information to people who have an interest. But it's challenging. There's no easy way to get there from here with where we are in El Dorado County, and we're not unlike all the other jurisdictions involved. Even when you get down into the farming areas, Yolo County, I think, is part of SACOG, if I remember, it used to be a lot of ag farmland. The property values down there have gone up substantially. So even building housing down there is an expensive proposition. And just the cost of materials are real high for a lot of things anymore. So short of being able to adopt 3D printer housing, where you don't have the labor force, you just put the machine out and turn it on and provide the concrete and it pours your housing. I don't know how we're going to be able to achieve some of these, but we're certainly going to look at all the alternatives. So that's kind of the arena presentation. Yeah, questions?
At our HOA meeting, it was reported through our management company and our president that there's a bill that was passed that is there's kind of going after HOAs and CCNRs and neighborhoods, and they want to break down the rules and make it so you can convert your garage into an apartment or rental units, which is kind of horrifying for.
Well, there's CCNRs that say you can't do that specifically.
I know,
but the state can override those things. So
right.
The one thing we're really stressing in El Dorado County is not that extreme, but we are stressing this accessory dwelling unit, the granny flat type of provision and stuff. And if people are willing to build a separate structure on their property that meets the county standards within the maximum size and everything, or convert part of an existing residence to a separate living quarters, that also qualifies. Those are the lowest cost ways to provide new housing opportunities against any other comparison we have.
But that goes against, I mean, just that we were talking about the number of extra cars in the community and the, against the hazards with what that brings and crime and schools, and the impact is huge.
There's a lot of challenges there, and how you address all of those satisfactorily is yet to be determined. The one thing I will tell you what the county, I think, is looking at pretty hard, and I'm an advocate of, is inclusionary housing, which basically says when you see a subdivision that's going to go in, and let's say they're going to build 100 new homes, that you determine that 10% or 15% or whatever the number is that the board could agree to has to be affordable housing, which means there's deed restrictions on that property, but the property looks like every other property on the street, basically, right? So people who have lower income can afford to have it, but they can't get the equity gain because of the deed restrictions. So they're allowed to get some equity gain out of the purchase they make, but they can't buy into something at half market value and then sell it for full market value after 2 years. That's what the deed restrictions do. Because you have to let another affordable housing person make it. So there's a whole lot of details to it. I don't know all the ins and outs, but we did have a presentation, a panel of people talk about it, and more it seems like that's the only way you're going to get some affordable housing with every project that's built that's maybe more than 4 units, is to require a percentage to be done in each of those subdivisions. What that ultimately does is raise the price of all the other housing, right? So what are you doing? You're subsidizing one for the other. So it really is a tough challenge to figure out how to make this stuff work in California. And even Texas is starting to have problems, as I understand. So, yeah, Tim.
Didn't the SACOG report break out? They said if El Dorado Hills, the community of El Dorado Hills, was actually a city,
yes,
that about 85% of these recommended housing units for the entire county would be forced to be located in El Dorado
So of
Hills.
the 4,994, I think the number was 4,092 of those 5,000 basically would have to be in El Dorado Hills. Because El Dorado Hills is where the growth is. So you're exactly right. So incorporation would bring with it other requirements of the community that's incorporated. And that's if you assume that all of El Dorado Hills incorporated at one point in time. Obviously, it's a function of the boundaries. If El Dorado Hills was determined to be a much smaller set of boundaries to form the initial city, then those numbers would not be that way. But they assumed everything within that, I think probably 95762 or something. They considered El Dorado Hills, which is District 1 and District 2 for the most part, and some of District 4.
But if, all right, so if the county, if we were an independent city, we had to get 90% of the affordable housing units that SACOG recommends. Where it's going to go now, since we're not a city at this point in time, is it going to be spread throughout the county, or is it still going to be 80% of it in El Dorado Hills?
You'd have to look at where there's available land, and we do have land that has not been committed to some form of development still within those boundaries of El Dorado Hills. But I think the bigger impact would be, it depends on what area you incorporate. One of the things you might want to look at is incorporating the raw land that's considered Marble Valley. We talked about 3,000 units out there. The plan was never to make it affordable housing. So whatever the incorporation effort, if there is an incorporation effort that's going to go forward, they have to consider those things and strategize what is the best way to provide for the boundaries such that you are allowed to build some set of affordable housing that can meet these conditions. Otherwise, the state's just going to start dictating it. And my fear then is our open space we have will definitely go, and it will be deemed by the state necessary to build affordable housing in some of these areas that were never intended to have housing in, right? That's just where I see the predicament headed. So, okay, with that, we're going to turn it over, I think, to John, and we'll just move down this. Go ahead, John. Go ahead and do the impact one, and then we'll move on.
Okay, we'll do it. The December APAC meeting is December 11th. That's next Wednesday in this building at 7 p.m. We have a rather short agenda. We do have a guest speaker. Kevin Lowe has agreed to come in and talk about the CSC's effort at looking at alternative power generation suppliers. You know, everyone's dissatisfied with PG&E and the current state of things. So Kevin's going to give just a quick update on what they can talk about right now, what they've been looking at, some of the news that they have. And it was in the paper recently, but he's going to give us an update live and in person. The other item we're going to be looking at is, again, we'll be looking at the Central El Dorado specific plan. We'll be providing a status update. Their first planning commission meeting was the day after our meeting, and Serrano Associates was here, and the video is available online if you'd like to look at that meeting. We're just going to kick around sort of where we're at, what we've heard at the planning commission, some questions that we've come up with, and then, you know, we'll look for some feedback from the public. And the one thing I want to say about this, and I'll say it again at the meeting, is that a lot of people are very concerned about the project and have opinions about it, pro, con, whatever. And a lot of people have said that they wanted to work on reviewing the project to provide resident feedback. To date, we have a very small group of people doing so. So the opportunity still exists. It's several more planning commission meetings, board of supervisor meetings. So we're still looking for resident input. Even if you only want to look at one thing, open space, you want to look at one thing, traffic, we still want that input. It's valuable. So we'll talk about that at the meeting. The other thing we have is we're going to do a quick review. There's been a bunch of J6 pre-application presentations to the board of supervisors, and those are previews before formal applications applied for development projects. And we've had three rather significant ones recently. We'll do a quick review of those and just give you sort of a ballpark. We've had a couple of them at APAC meetings, but we'll sort of review those and see how those presentations went and just sort of the general opinion of how they were received by the board. And then the very last thing we'll have is our 2020 APAC officer elections. So right now, as it stands, the current officers have all agreed to continue on for another meeting. We'll have APAC members voting on that. We'll see how, if y'all want to throw us bumps out, we'll see how it works out. But we encourage everybody to come out on Wednesday. Again, short agenda, we want to get through real fast. It's the end of the year, and hopefully we just get good feedback on these projects, and we could incorporate that in our subcommittee review of the project. So pass it on to Dick after that.
Okay. Good governance. kind of changing the theme of things a little bit. John has asked me to comment about a process in the state government, both state, county, and local, whereas those who are official and public employees who make or influence governmental decisions have to submit an information form known as Form 700. And this form identifies upon personal reporting the official's personal financial interest, and the purpose is to make sure that when they carry out their decision-making roles, it is not likely to benefit some personal interests of their own, enhancing their own personal finances, and that it is in the best interest of the public. It also is a way for the officials to remember that they can have potential conflicts of interest that they may not initially be thinking about when they're reviewing a particular thing, and reporting their economic interest is a way of refreshing their memory as to what might be out there. What is reported in detail is probably the most for those officials in the highest positions relative to influencing governmental decisions. But even people in the lower levels of state and county government have to report information, although oftentimes not in as great detail. Most appointed positions in the county have some degree of a economic interest. I'm on the Civil Service Commission, and I too have to fill out a Form 700 form, although not in terribly great detail, as the things I am involved with rarely affect any kind of financial financial interest. But so it varies depending upon the position. So,
very good. Thank you for that. Jennifer?
It's the fun holiday season, lots going on, especially down in town center. Santa photos are happening all throughout the month. There's also the horse-drawn carriages. Here at the CSD, they're going to be on December 6th. There's a holiday art and craft fair from 10 to 7. The Christmas tree lighting is at Town Center is going to be December 7th. Well, the other things I have on this list was already gone over by Chief Lilly. There's on the December 14th and 21st, there's like community performances. There's all different dance and music events by local people that are performing down at the Town Center Plaza, which is really neat. And there's then December 26th, there's a Hanukkah, it's a 4th annual menorah lighting at Town Center at the Stephen Young Amphitheater. And then after all the holiday is over on January 4th, there's going to be a Christmas tree recycling. You can take your Christmas tree. This year it's going to be at Rolling Hills Church. So you can take it there and they recycle your tree. And all of this is on our website, on Supervisor Hidal's website, on our website. So all the links to the stuff. And the list is back here.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, we had the Planning Commission first meeting for Central El Dorado Hills. That was on the 14th of November, and our next meeting is going to be not this Thursday, but the following Thursday, the 12th, I believe it is. So, but yeah, we had a long presentation from planning as well as the applicant, and then we had DOT and some of the other departments come up and speak. And planning commissioners had some questions and comments. We sent them back to the drawing board on some traffic issues. One issue that was brought up is in the development agreement, they provide an option to continue the extension of Saratoga Park over to Silver Valley Parkway, but they didn't analyze the traffic, what the traffic impacts could be for that, as well as some other details of that. When it comes to the opening of Iron Point in Saratoga, I've talked to Raphael, DOT director. I asked him about the option. I don't think I mentioned this to you. I talked to him about the option of opening up, blocking off Wilson and just opening up Iron Point and Saratoga, if that could advance things, because one of the other comments I had made is that the uncertainty of what kind of traffic we're going to get once we open that up. And so I was hoping to help accelerate that so we had a better idea. So to me, as I mentioned at the hearing, there's a lot of uncertainties associated with this project. And with the combining of the west side with the Pedregal, I was concerned about, the complexities of having these projects together as one project. So we've got a lot of issues to deal with still, and we appreciate your comments and input. And one thing that was on here was the intersection. Was there anything you want me to address specifically?
Yeah, there's two particular pinch points that I've seen have been raised, and Jim kind of raised the same thing.
Right.
One is on the Rayleigh side of the boulevard, when you come in on Park Drive, and you get this kind of weird intersection where you either go down to Rayleigh's, or you go into La Sienna, or you go. And that whole intersection design with significant traffic increases, once that roadway is ultimately connected to Silver Valley, it's really got to be dealt with early on and understand what is the space required and how do you make all that flow correctly. And I don't think that's been fully analyzed.
And we also addressed that at the mega meeting, and staff has indicated that's still an outstanding issue. After our meeting, I met with the traffic superintendent, Darrell Brown, at County DOT. And he, because what they're proposing to do is do an all-way stop, realign Park so that'll continue on straight through, and then tee off where you go down into Rayleigh's at that access. And he was of the opinion that that's going to be an area of concern over time. It's going to be a pinch point. And I don't think they have, at this point, a solution at this point, but we'll see what they come up with. But it's an area of concern. And again, I'm really wanting to get that traffic open to Iron Point to see, what we're looking at, because, they're model estimates, and that's all they are. And so they could be fairly accurate, but we don't know until we get some real cars on there. And so I have some serious concerns, with that, with the traffic. Issues, we talked about affordable housing. Commissioner Williams had raised that issue. He's trying to get county planning to work with, and the county to work with the developer to see about providing. I think we're trying to be realistic about moderate affordable housing and so forth. So we're looking at that as a potential option as well. So there's lots of moving parts to this, and we've only just begun. And in January, we're going to have a special meeting down here in El Dorado Hills, an evening meeting. And I don't think we've confirmed it, but I think it's going to be on the 13th, I think, of January. If my memory serves.
I haven't heard of it yet.
Yeah, and we're tentatively shooting for that date at the district church, but that has not been confirmed as yet. So that's what we're working to confirm. Because we understand we're going to need a larger venue. And again, that meeting is going to be strictly just public comments. Like I said earlier, I'd like to hear more public comments. I appreciate all the emails and so forth, but I do want to hear from the folks some more. And so, as it stands now, unless we have some further delays, we had a little catch up to do on some of the appendices for the final EIR, as well as some of the updated traffic stuff, which we're still waiting to get the final traffic stuff on the agenda. So it's a complex issue, so I understand there's things that can be missed and so forth. So we're getting there.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm concerned. I thought that there wasn't going to be any more comment after the December meeting. You just said January, it's all public comment.
Yep, all public comment.
In El Dorado Hills, dedicated meeting.
An evening meeting.
So I guess my concern is we spent a lot of time making public comments, and I don't get a real warm feeling that those go anywhere.
Well, from my standpoint, I appreciate them. If you've had the opportunity to read through the EIR, there's a lot of smart folks in this community that has provided some very detailed technical responses, and I greatly and I know APAC does as well, greatly appreciate those comments. And I think we've mentioned, and I think APAC mentioned before, you know, we can have emotional responses to things, and that's well and good, you're free to do that, but I'd like some fact-based stuff that really helps me in respect to, because that's what we've got to do. You know, we all have emotions and feelings about it, but a lot of the stuff has got to be fact-based and so forth. So there's a lot of smart folks out there, and I really appreciate the public comments. So as many as we can get. And you know, if we're not, as a planning commission, if we're not satisfied that we've gotten enough answers to our questions and we need some more time for the applicant to provide us some more information, or staff, or need more time for public comments, we could always continue it and for another meeting.
Yeah, I think one of my things, I don't know whether I can articulate it, but the DEIR or IER, I can't remember which one it is. It addresses certain factors, but they're not real world factors. They're DIER factors. And real world factors is that our roads are crumbling. You know, if you drive down Serrano Boulevard, those roads are crumbling. You know, we can say that the traffic is going to be okay through this mitigation. But what's happening, you know, further, you know, this extra traffic is going to just make these roads totally crumble. And that's a real world concern of mine. Further, a couple of times I eat breakfast every Monday morning down at Mimosa House with a bunch of guys. There have been a couple of times when EDH Boulevard was closed due to an accident or something of that nature. And the road gets totally clogged up. I mean, just with that one incident. You can't get onto the freeway. You can't get down to Latrobe for a long period of time. That's just a small problem. What happens if we have a major disaster? You know, how do we handle that? I don't think this has been addressed. And you look back at, you know, the Paradise Fire, you look at, you know, since the last DEIR we had a fire, can't think of the other thing, the drought, and we're all talking about, well, we have water's okay. Those to me are real world things that we need to plan for, and the DEIR doesn't do that for us, I don't think.
Well, we have a final EIR. Now, the D is the draft. There was a draft, and then the final, you know, where staff addresses the questions and comments that were provided, along with additional analysis that may be required by the applicant. When it comes to maintenance of roads, you know, I'm not aware of any environmental document that, you know, because the county has jurisdiction to maintain those, you know, for ongoing maintenance of the road. And, you know, maybe it's a safe assumption, maybe it's not, that they're keeping up with that. I'll leave it at that. But
it's being glossed over, you know.
But the environmental document is kind of at a high level view, and certainly if there's holes in it, things that need to get addressed. But as I mentioned in our last meeting here, I believe it was, that the way they're approaching this is they don't have specific projects as of yet. These are large lot tended maps with a phasing plan, and then they want to come in with the specific projects later. So you don't have that detailed analysis where you have impacts and you have mitigations and conditions of approval. You have a few mitigation measures based on what the EIR presented itself with. And those are some of the questions that I raised, that, hey, there's still a lot of, fair amount of uncertainty here. And so we'll have to see where the comfort level is when they come back with the additional information. But right now it's at a higher level. They want to propose to, and they believe that they can mitigate those impacts when they come in with the individual subdivisions if they're approved. So.
Yeah, I had three things that I just now remembered. We have an electrical grid problem that we didn't have in 2015. We had the flood, the drought, and we had, I forgot it too tired. But anyway, these are real world things that happen. And somehow that needs to be put into the formula. And you just can't say, well, here's the DEIR, and the problem with the DEIR is all of a sudden it turns into a mitigation element that never gets followed up on, and it gets lost in the cracks. And that to me is a big issue with this whole process too.
Well, let's work our way through the process and see where we're at.
Let me add to the conversation a little bit. The state CEQA requirements or the environmental documents you're talking about, those have to be complied with by state law. But inputs of public comment relative to the ones you're making, we have PSPSs that are happening that we never envisioned. We have evacuation planning responsibilities that we haven't fulfilled. We have a number of things that are real world, recent events that go into that discussion of what happens with any of these projects. The thing that a lot of people don't recognize is if, for instance, the Planning Commission were to deny this project, there has to be findings for denial. And they have to be based on factual information that substantiates defects. It has to substantiate the fact the county would have to be subsidizing the project, which is basically what Dixon Ranch was based upon. There has to be findings that have substantial evidence that the county did its due diligence in meeting these requirements. And you get those primarily because of public input. Because no one's smart enough to figure out everything that goes on. If you live very close to where development's going in, you know the traffic patterns, you know the behavior of people, you know what will work and what won't work. People at our county planning department don't know that unless they live in Eldorado Hills. So that's the important part of the public comment. Everybody who has a concern about something that hasn't been previously stated, because it doesn't do a lot of good to hear things 10 times over. Once it's been heard, that's fine. But if you have something unique, they should be stepping up and speaking to it, because that's the total context.
I think the problem is how do you get the emotion out of that?
And it's difficult. It's difficult for all of us. But sometimes you have to put it in writing, right? You do it on a non-emotional time frame, you put it in writing, and then you can go and read it, and then you stay away from the emotional a little bit. Or submit the written comment. You don't have to appear to have it go on the record. I think it's more powerful if people appear and express some emotion, but it's not required. Yes?
I have a process question. So APAC has this meeting next week,
Yes.
or a week from whatever.
Next
And
week.
so you guys send an advice or advisory commentary to the Planning Commission, is that correct? Or you send it to
We'll
the
submit it to the Planning Commission and to the Board of Supervisors.
Pardon me?
We have a subcommittee reviewing the project, and then when we come to a conclusion, the subcommittee will present it to our voting members of APAC. We'll vote whether we want to accept that recommendation, support it, and we'll pass it on to the Planning Commission. We'll also share it with the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, so the subcommittee actually develops the document that is your advice to the planning people. Okay, now to be a voting member of your APAC, like I read all the documents, almost. That's not to say I understood them all, but
You and me both.
but I read them, scanned them. I can't tell you about the traffic reports. That was just mind-boggling. But so how do you become a voting member of APAC?
I'm glad you asked.
Pardon me?
I'm glad you asked. Become a voting member of APAC, you work on a project review.
Okay,
Once
how
you've
do you
done
do
that, well, you know what? If you come back over here and I make sure I have your email separate from all these other emails.
You've sent me an email before.
Okay, that's right. Don't remind me.
Okay,
Because
Nancy, yeah, Nancy.
I send one or two a day.
Okay.
I think
Nancy
there's about
did
3,000 in my inbox right now.
You sent me the email that has all the listing of all the different documents that
Yes.
we were supposed to review, which I reviewed.
So, you have notes that you've made on any of them, or concerns, comments, questions?
It's overwhelming.
Yes, it is.
And this is my first time ever looking at any of this. So to
Exactly.
me, I can't actually make a whole lot of comment right now because I'm still learning how you look at this stuff. But I just was trying to figure out the process of what.
So, to become a voting member, you participate in the process. But if you have questions and comments that you're making to yourself, or you go, I don't know, make a note of it. So, and email me or Tim or whoever else is on thing. But we'll collect them all together. I will email you back and say, or call you if you want me to really bother you. And we'll say, hey, here's what we're looking at. We have that question too, or we didn't look at it that way. Is there something else but it's a collaborative effort. It's just asking questions, or maybe stating an opinion. And I don't think that's sufficient. I think that's deficient. I think that, well, you know what, this project would be better if they did this, those type of things. And so that's what we'll look for. If you, please email me to remind me, because between here and there. But that's how, and then, but if you participate in that process, you're in like Clint.
Well, I don't really have this need to be a voting member right this minute. I'm just trying to understand how you do this.
But we have a need. So,
yes, but there's a huge learning curve you have to do.
That's what I'm saying. It's like,
and that's why we used to encourage having committee meetings where you get a group of people together and you can really share ideas. And the attorneys in the room usually try to keep us straight about what you can and can't do. And sometimes I was outside attorneys providing input on what you can do in terms of comments on a draft EIR. And it's very important to present data. Presenting an opinion is only interesting, right? You have to present a similar situation or data that says, hey, this is contradictory what they're putting in this report on the traffic analysis, and it came from another traffic analysis done by a different company that covered the same area, whatever it may be, right? Those are the kinds of things you really have to make sure people are aware of, because where you have those built-in conflicts, they need to be resolved. They can't be ignored. So maybe Tim's got a comment too.
Well, you know, again, I come from a business background. You know, worked for a company for 27 years, in-house counsel. You know, if we had gone to the board of directors with a plan, as Parker has gone, and with this plan, there's so many unanswered questions that, you know, data that's not complete, traffic analysis that's still coming in. You know, another 400 pages came in a week and a half ago, and I think you said there's more coming. You know, the board of directors would have just rejected it and say, come back when you have all this stuff answered. I think there's a lot of questions out there that have not been answered and need to be answered sooner rather than later so the public can understand them. I'll just point out one thing. When the planning department made the presentation before the planning commission, I think it was Aaron who made the presentation for the planning department, and he said this was an infill project. And Kurt Bone, in his presentation to the Planning Commission, and I think also his presentation to APAC, said this is an infill project. And he also said that if you look at the county general plan, this Central Colorado Health Pacific plan met 121 out of 121 general plan requirements.
Policies and goals, yeah.
Policies and stuff like that. But then, if you go to the general plan, it says an infill project is defined as 5 acres or less, not 140 acres or 100 acres or whatever it is. It's not between some development on one side of El Dorado Hills Boulevard and something else on the other side of Silver Valley. You know, so it's like in litigation, or when you have a witness in front of a judge and jury, one lie, one mistake allows you to question the veracity of everything else that they say. And when I find a mistake like that, made by professional people, both in the planning department and by Kirk and his team of developers, it really calls you to question what else is misstated, what else is incorrect, and what else is not factually right. And, you know, you can only get into so many details when now it's up to 3,800 pages of documents. You know, we don't have, as individuals, as a group, we don't have the expertise, knowledge. I mean, like you, traffic just, you know, rolls right over my head. I can get into some of the other things, but when I look at 10 pages of statistics, I'm dead. Literally, let's sit down to sleep, dead. That's why we have John and John who have more of an expertise in traffic. I'm just saying, you really have to get into the details. You cannot be emotional. I mean, you have to have other plans. You don't want, you know, realistically, there's never going to be a golf course there again. You know, I did a little research. It would be about $4 or $5 million to put in the golf course right where the old one was. Statistically, it doesn't make sense. I doubt the CSD, with all their budgetary needs, is going to want to run a golf course because it will probably be a money loser the way it would have to be run. So, anyway, I know it's late. You want to go home. I'm done.
I plan on correcting the record on some of that stuff, and, you know, like say the open space stuff, as well as I'm going to ask the planning department to give an overview as to what was missing in the final EIR, as well as, in addition to the traffic stuff, the latest traffic stuff that's still missing. And so I'm going to ask them to provide an overview in respect to what has been submitted by the county after the first meeting. And so, they don't know that yet, unless they watch this video, maybe they'll find out. But I will be
And,
letting them know that.
while you're asking for that, ask about the development agreement, because the development agreement is about a 30-page document, and there are about 10 or 15 exhibits that are supposed to be attached to that. I know it's a draft, I know drafts change, but again, that should be part of the public process to see.
So they were not included either?
There are no exhibits to the development agreement.
They're not on the county website relative to the entire package?
Some of these things are very basic stuff, like it's supposed to be a draft of, as currently written, the development agreement, a form of the deed of trust that would be conveyed from Parker Development Company to the county if they were to elect to take that 11.5 acre site. There's no form of a deed of trust. I mean, there's all those exhibits that are supposed to be there are not.
The exhibits or the attachments? Because I read it differently. Attachment means it's a document that has a specific date, time, whatever.
The development agreement does not have, I believe, the only attachments it's supposed to have are the financial analysis, but everything else is an exhibit.
Okay, gotcha. The exhibit is more of an example, and so I've
It's
seen
an
a lot
example.
of
This is
these
what it's
things,
going to
but-
look like. Now, maybe it's premature to have that.
Let's talk
but-
later about that offline. And are we gonna be seeing APAC's comments before the next planning commission meeting?
APAC is struggling with the comments right now because, as I said earlier, the participation, a lot of people want to work on it. A lot of people are not working on it. It's the usual faces. So we're trying to get our arms around it. We have a lot of, we have somebody who's working on it, has a lot of findings where the consistency that's stated is there with the general plan. We have questions. So that's a long list. But having it all wrapped up, I don't know, would you rather see 18 documents from us or one?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how it's rolling out. My goal, I honestly wanted to have something to present. It's sort of a...
You can present the 18 documents, just put a cover letter with it.
There you go. Send out a thorough fax machine. But no, ideally I wanted to have that input from the subcommittee next week. And it's just not going to happen.
So how tight is the time? And can we move that thing at all? I mean,
The planning commission can continue the hearings if they
Well,
don't believe they have sufficient time to review everything.
I envision right now that we would have those comments to you before the January meeting here.
Well, and if we keep having holes in the data that's supposed to be in the attachments, I have no problem continuing this project. I'll make a motion. So we'll see, again, we'll see how it plays out, and it's just it's a process.
John, question. You referred to this as a big lot proposal, combining a lot of things in one package. Can that process alone be fatal to this, saying that this has to be separated so it can be managed? Because if this thing can be made so complex that it cannot be analyzed because of its size and overwhelm the resources of the local community and the county. I heard the man say, I've already spent, was it $3 million or $6 million to get it this far?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I used to work in the federal government, and oftentimes we would say, they're trying to baffle us with bullshit. And the technique sometimes works.
Yeah.
And you've got to separate out the various components that are realistically separable.
Yeah. Well, and that could be if the planning commission decides to not approve this or recommend that the board does not approve this, that could be, if we think it's too complex because it's combined. Some people believe that, it's good to combine it because then you can analyze how they interact. But to me, I don't share that view. Especially I went and walked the Pedrigal site last week and stuff, and there's a whole different set of issues to me over there than what's over on the west side.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it plays out. But that could be something we provide to the Board of Supervisors. If the planning commission is not satisfied with the data that we've gotten, that hey, we recommend that hey, we separate these projects.
I was just gonna say, I agree with separating out the drain bowl because it seems like that is so, the issues are so unrelated to the west side, the golf course part of the project. And that would make it more manageable as far as analyzing it.
So we'll see, again, we'll see, this is kind of a what if, so we gotta go through the
And to be
process.
fair, there have been larger projects. Dorado itself, the Dorado Hills Container Plant, 4 housing units.
So the other thing I'll note is this is the first time that I'm aware of that the county planning department has not made recommendations to the planning commission on any of this. It's a new philosophy that they're not going to make recommendations piece by piece as these things go through a planning commission hearing because they've been accused of a lot of things. And they've decided that, all right, this project is so large and it is so complex that they're not going to provide the normal recommendations. And that's a totally different dimension to try to deal with if you're the developer or you're the public to try to figure out where is this, because it puts a lot of responsibility on the planning commission now to have to try to wade through that to figure out, is all the information here? Do we really have a complete package? Do we feel confident in making a decision on this piece of it before we go to the next piece of it? And that's, I think, something that I'm not sure is in the right direction overall for the county, but it's unique to this particular project that that's the position that's been taken. What I suggested to them is I felt the planning department should provide alternative recommendations. Don't say, this one is what we recommend because we feel strongly, blah, blah, blah. If you're not comfortable with doing that, but provide 2 or 3 alternatives. You could recommend doing this, you could recommend doing this, you could decide that this element doesn't make sense, right? But provide a reasonable range of alternatives for the planning commission to consider. They're doing that anyway, but if you get something that might provide an additional alternative that you didn't think about, then maybe that's the trigger that makes some of this work or not work. But that doesn't mean that either. So.
To me, you have to first look at whether this project can stand alone. Is the county going to lose money on it? If they're going to lose money on it, then forget all the rest of these.
Totally agree. And Joe Harn is our agent who's supposed to be doing that independent evaluation.
That's right. I'm supposed to be doing that?
No, Joe Harn.
Okay.
Joe Hart weighed in on Dixon Ranch, and the vote was, we can't approve this because the county will be harmed. The community will be harmed by this project as proposed. That's what happened with Dixon Ranch. Now, unfortunately, I don't know where Joe is going to stand on this one, except I know in general he's opposed to the project, but I don't know the financial thing because he has basically removed himself from the development agreement process.
I have asked his input, and I'll continue to ask his input.
So we'll try to get that, and ultimately maybe we'll have an answer. Because the financial feasibility, the impact to the county of this whole kind of project is a major consideration. Because in the past, the county has accepted projects that did do harm to the community and did impose additional roadway maintenance that wasn't funded in any other way. Because the TIM fees weren't adequately set up for especially the expansion, the capital improvements. So there's a number of things we know we've lived through the history of not to be repeated. But we really, at the county level, rely heavily on the auditor controller to kind of be the third independent view of all that to make sure that, from his perspective, the numbers make sense. That it is viable and the county's not going to be subsidized.
He's pretty much paying attention now.
Yeah. Well, he's appealing to J-Lot H.
J7.
J7 subdivision up the Serrano. So we'll see how that one progresses through the board, because that appeal will go right to the board of directors, the board of supervisors. So we'll see how that one prospers. But yeah.
He made a couple of, on the next door, you can say smiley face, agree, or heart. Did a couple of hearts on a couple of my photos. That made me feel good.
Well, he's an elected official. Reach out to him and ask him for that input.
He will take your phone call.
Huh?
He will take the phone call.
Right.
Because he's called me. So.
Because I rely on all of our other elected officials, whether it's the auditor controller, whether it's the treasurer tax collector, the sheriff, the surveyor. I rely on them a lot to provide information and data in terms of, does this work for the county? Are we doing the right things?
Yeah, that's good for me. For me, I don't know the difference between a planning commission and a planning council or whatever it is. I mean,
planning
it all
board,
just gets kind of meshed together. And then, board of supervisors is the final judgment. They're the ones that make the final decision. And it just doesn't make sense to me how all this flows.
Well, I'm not a county employee. I was appointed by him. Okay.
He's a volunteer.
I'm a volunteer.
He gets a small amount of compensation for transportation, and that's all, for all the
That's
hours
all.
of dedicated study and reading he does, yeah.
So, so we're kind of the first check in the approval process on a lot of these discretionary projects. A lot of them just go to us, but they can always appeal to the board, and like this will go to the board automatically as well, so.
So do you have resources at your fingertips, like an accountant?
I can, no, it's me, myself, and I.
But
I talk to department heads and staff, and, I request information, and also the applicant, but that's on me.
So, do
And
you
Cindy
have-
helps me out a lot.
But do you have resources in the county where you could say, I need a financial analysis on this?
Nope.
We don't have that facility available.
Well, there's a requirement for a fiscal analysis, a financial analysis to be submitted by the developer. It's been submitted. Now the question is, who has the wherewithal to review all that and read through all of those numbers and words to make sure that what's being submitted as a viable project is truly viable? To me, that's our auditor controller who's been through these many times.
If you want to talk to me offline, I'd be happy to. I don't want to have to keep everyone else here. So if you'd like to, feel free. I'll stick around afterward.
Yeah. One last, and then I think we got to close it down. We're getting close to 9:30, but.
Just real quick, I noticed that there's a sale sign that's gone up on property on Silver Valley Road. After you go through the four-way stop at Appian and before you get to Green Valley, there's raw land there. What's happening with that? What's that zone for?
It's a 5-acre site owned by an individual, and he has owned that property for a number of years, and he's just listing it for sale.
So is it residential? Or is it?
I believe it is zoned R5 residential, 5-acre residential.
Yeah. Is it one? Is that
R5, 5-acre residential estate, 5-acre minimum?
It's a one lot, it's a 5-acre lot.
I'm just trying to remember. It might be one, but it is a 5-acre lot.
Yeah.
It might be one. Was it one? What's the one?
So we'd have to look at the zoning.
Well, we got a number, you got a phone number, give a call.
We can find it.
We'll keep track of everything.
Are we buying it?
Or what are we locating there? Do we want to put something in there? Maybe the CSD is interested. That's a nice off-the-road site, right? So whatever.
I have a question.
Yeah, yeah.
That creek behind the park, I don't know what it's called, but anyway, it used to be a seasonal creek. Well, ever since you guys have been building way up there on Serrano and all this, that creek with all the water that's being used and what have you, it's now become a year-round creek. And at times, it looks like it's going to overflow, and it's getting...
So help me understand which creek. You're not talking New York Creek back over here, right? What are you talking? Which creek?
It's the one that, it's behind the park that goes, is it Carson Creek?
Carson Creek comes down from Bass Lake.
So which park are you referring to? Because the CSD has
Mobile home
lots.
park.
Oh, the mobile home park.
Yeah, it's behind the apartments.
That is part of the Carson Creek drainage, yes.
See, when they built the apartments, they put those nice rocks up there, you know, and they left our side kind of blank so that the berm can be eaten away. And I was wondering, is there anything that can be done to get those rocks on our side so that it kind of protects the mobile home park? Because that creek at one point did overflow.
It used to run through town center too, right? That's when they did the lakes, they realigned.
Right. And I remember when the project next to the mobile home park was going in. It's changed names now. I'm trying to remember what the current name is opposed to the previous name. But that was a major concern of APAC, is what about all this additional water flow and what happens in that creek?
Mm-hmm.
And there were responses given that the studies had been done and 50-year floodplain was satisfied. And we seem to have 50-year floods every 3 years, but that doesn't seem to be a major consideration. So I don't know the answer relative to why something can't be done there. Because we all know the more hardscape you have with developments and stuff, the more runoff you're gonna get.
Yes.
Because the soil is not gonna absorb that much underneath where the structures are. You'll get some
Exactly.
leaching, but it's basically gonna run off the rooftops into the creeks, and so you're gonna have more water
Yeah, and
drainage.
that little area behind our fence and the creek, you know, it used to be 10 feet wide, it's now like 5 feet wide in some areas, and maybe 2.5 feet wide. You know, so it is getting eaten away. And, you know, what can be done? I need to protect all those people in there and their homes. And, you know, something needs to be done.
So John, do you know if that's Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, rather, is that an Army Corps project for that drainage, the Carson Creek drainage? That's a major drainage. I think that's Army Corps
Well,
jurisdiction.
Fish and Game, that would be, you know, Fish and Game would have jurisdiction over that.
But
Fish and Game has no jurisdiction over that.
In respect to getting your permits, you know, to work within the creek and so forth, you know, there's different agencies you'd have to go through. Fish and Game would be, Corps would be one as well.
I think it's Army Corps of Engineers.
The Army, I remember the Army Corps of Engineers being mentioned.
Because I think ultimately they have jurisdiction on this.
They're the ones that have the jurisdiction, but how do we go about getting the protection for that berm? I mean, you know, something needs to be done.
Sounds like there needs to be a letter submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers to let them know that the situation has changed over the last 10 years. And they need to come out and do an analysis to determine what has to be done to fortify the levee or whatever you want to call it.
And some of those trees inside, you know, when it was a seasonal creek, the trees did well. Well, now that the roots are wet all year round, some of those trees are dying, you know, and they're causing a lot of problems as far as causing the water to dam up in areas.
Why don't you submit an email to my office describing what the situation is, and then that gives me something that we can forward to our contact with the Army Corps of Engineers and ask some questions for them to come out and do a look-see at what's going on, because I don't think they go around and regularly inspect or patrol anything. I think they sit in offices somewhere and respond to phone calls, but I'm not sure they're doing it. It's like
You can start with the planning department.
Okay,
They can give you some advice on where to go.
It is starting to get critical. I mean, last year it almost came over the banks again.
Right. So you're really in District 2 and not District 1.
I know.
So we need to make sure that she
No, we
is
have to check to
involved
see
with
what
this.
they're
Because she may
going
already
down.
be doing something that I don't know about relative to that, so we want to make sure that we don't duplicate or anything, but she would be the right person. But if you want to send it to my office, looking forward to Sheba. It'd be better probably send it directly to Sheba Frenson. And just CC me and just mention, you know, we discussed it in this meeting, and this is your request that she take an active role to discuss with the appropriate parties what the future improvements are going to be in that drainage, because the water levels are increasing and it's now year-round, and the things you told us, you know, just put that in the email and hopefully you'll get a response. But whenever you get into federal or state government stuff, it takes a long time usually to get the response. Not that the county is ultra responsive, but federal or state government seems to take a lot longer. So
How is it that the state is responsible for that?
Well, the water board is usually.
Waters of the state.
Well, waters of the United States too, so.
There's waters of the U.S. and waters of the state.
Right. So what's the determination on that? So but it's really appropriate to let Sheba.
That's not something we're going to answer at 9:30 tonight.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be.
I'm just wondering.
Good question.
Respectful for the CSD.
One final point. You know, it's again, looking at the development agreement, it says the developer provided the county a fiscal impact analysis dated blank 2017. If it was dated blank 2017, it's anywhere from 2 years to almost 3 years old, which was January. At a minimum, I would think you would want to get the developer to present one that was done in the last 2 or 3 months. The fact that they presented it 2 years ago, that information is somewhat irrelevant to what the current financial situation is now. And I think before you even go much further, as I guess Jim might agree, that, you know, you should get the latest financial information from a fiscal impact analysis, because if this doesn't map up the way it should, then the whole project should be earlier on, rather than going through this continual dog and pony show.
Right. And I don't know if Joe Harden reviewed that FIA in 2017 and responded or didn't respond, because I'm not part of those discussions.
Okay.
I don't know the dynamics, the dialogue, whatever happened there.
I'm going to give Joe.
But I will hope that Joe would have
numbers.
responded with something, but.
We should be looking at real numbers.
Right, absolutely.
For 2 years.
Real current numbers.
Yes.
Not something that was, 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, that may never have had a thorough review.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. Okay, with that, thank you for your patience and attendance tonight. We'll see you back in January. Our next meeting is Monday, January 6th, and we're not going to have a guest speaker because it's coming back after the holidays and we need a break, right? So,
Somebody asked us.
yeah, right.
Well, we know what the